I was sitting in my recliner watching my favorite renovation show when the screen suddenly went black. I looked up to see my son-in-law Brent standing over me with the remote in his hand and a look of pure disgust on his face. "Enough of this," he spat out. "Give me the remote, you useless old man." My daughter Tasha was standing right behind him, and I waited for her to defend me. I waited for her to say that this was my house and my television. Instead, she just looked down at her phone and nodded silently. I did not say a word. I simply stood up and walked up the stairs to my room. They thought I was defeated. They thought I was just a senile old man accepting his fate. They had no idea that by the time they returned from work the next day, their keys would not fit the locks, and the life they thought they owned would be gone forever. Before I tell you how I evicted my own family without saying a single word, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to remind people exactly who you are. My name is Caleb Johnson, and I am 70 years old. I spent 40 years as a structural engineer pouring the concrete foundations that hold up half the skyline of this city. I know a thing or two about load-bearing walls, and I know exactly how much pressure a structure can take before it collapses. For the last 3 years since my wife Bee passed away, I have been the silent structure holding up my daughter and her husband. I let them move into my 4-bedroom colonial house when Brent lost his job. I paid off their credit card debt quietly. I cooked their meals. I thought I was helping family. But yesterday I realized I was just harboring termites. It was a Tuesday evening and the humidity in the living room was thick. I was watching this old house enjoying the craftsmanship of a proper window installation. It was the only hour of the day I truly relaxed. Then came the click. Brent stood there in his cheap polyester suit smelling of stale cologne and arrogance. He tossed the remote onto the sofa like he was discarding a piece of trash. "You are always watching this garbage," Brent sneered. "Do something productive for once, Caleb. You are just taking up space. Valuable space. Tasha and I have been talking. We need this living room for a home office. You can move your recliner to the basement. Or better yet, maybe it is time we looked at that facility on the east side." My heart hammered against my ribs, but my face remained like stone. I looked at Tasha. My little girl. The girl I taught to ride a bike on this very driveway. She refused to meet my eyes. She was inspecting her fingernails as if the dismantling of her father's dignity was a boring chore she just wanted to be over with. "You agree with him, Tasha?" I asked. My voice was low, gravelly. She shifted her weight and finally looked at me with cold, empty eyes. "Look, Dad," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "Brent is right. You are getting older. You are forgetful. You leave lights on. You are just in the way. We need to modernize this place. We need the space." The silence that followed was deafening. In that moment, the daughter I raised died. The woman standing there was a stranger who wanted my home but not my presence. I could have shouted. I could have told them that the deed to this house was in a safe deposit box they could not access. I could have told them that I had more money in my retirement account than Brent would make in 10 lifetimes. But I learned a long time ago on the construction site that you do not argue with fools. You just change the locks. I stood up slowly, my knees popping in the silence. I looked at Brent. I looked at Tasha. I memorized their faces in that moment. The arrogance, the entitlement, the utter lack of respect. I walked past them. I climbed the oak staircase that I had sanded and stained with my own hands 30 years ago. I went into my bedroom and closed the door. I heard them laughing downstairs. I heard the TV turn back on to some loud reality show. They thought they had won. They thought the old man had retreated to lick his wounds. But I was not sleeping. I pulled my old military duffel bag from the back of the closet. I did not pack clothes. I packed the things that mattered. The framed photo of Bay, my drafting compass, and the small steel box kept under the floorboards beneath my bed. Inside that box were the original blueprints of this house. Every wire, every pipe, every secret, and the title deed proving that Caleb Johnson was the sole owner of this property and the land it sat on. At 2 a.m., when the house was finally quiet and I could hear Brent snoring down the hall, I took out my phone. I dialed a number I had not called since my days as a site foreman. It rang once. "Yeah," a voice answered. "Yeah, SCS. Rough. Awake." "Saul, it is Caleb." There was a pause, then a low chuckle. Caleb Johnson. I heard you retired. I did, I said, looking out the window at the streetlights. But I have one last job. I need the Emerald Protocol. Tomorrow morning. Saul let out a low whistle. Emerald Protocol. That is the nuclear option, Caleb. You sure? I am sure. They leave for work at 8 a.m. Be here at 8:01. Consider it done. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the dark listening to the house settle. I listened to the wind in the eaves. I was saying goodbye. Not to the house, but to the life I had lived in it, to the memories of Tasha growing up, to the ghost of the family I thought I had. By morning, that family would cease to exist. The sun came up with a cruel brightness. I heard their alarm clocks go off. I heard the rush of water in the pipes as they showered. The smell of coffee drifted upstairs. They did not call me for breakfast. They did not check on me. I watched from my window as they walked to the car. Brent was checking his hair in the side mirror of his leased BMW. Tasha was typing on her phone, probably complaining to a friend about her burdensome father. "See you later, Dad," Tasha yelled toward the house without looking up. "Try not to burn the place down," Brent laughed. "Yeah, old man. And move that chair to the basement by tonight. I mean it." They got in the car. The engine revved. They drove away without a backward glance. As soon as their taillights disappeared around the corner, I turned away from the window. I walked downstairs. The house was empty. It felt cold. I walked to the front door and opened it wide. 2 gray, unmarked vans pulled into the driveway. They moved with precision. Saul stepped out of the first van. He was older now, gray in the beard, but he still looked like a tank. He held a heavy drill in one hand and a high-tech smart lock system in the other. Behind him, 4 men in coveralls jumped out carrying steel shutters and heavy toolboxes. "You ready for this?" Caleb Saul asked, stepping onto the porch. I looked at the driveway where my daughter had just driven away. I looked at the neighborhood I had helped build. I took a deep breath. "I have never been more ready in my life," I said. "Change every lock, Saul." Biometric scanners on the doors, steel shutters on the ground floor windows, and cut the master utility line to the guest wing. Saul grinned. "Scorched earth. I like it." "We have 8 hours before they come back," I said, checking my watch. "Let us turn this home into a fortress." The sound of drills biting into wood filled the air. It was the sound of construction. It was the sound of renovation. But mostly it was the sound of consequences. The house was silent now, but it was not the empty silence of abandonment. It was the heavy, expectant silence of a trap waiting to be sprung. I sat in my armchair in the living room, the same chair Brent had ordered me to move to the basement just 24 hours ago. But I was not watching television. I was watching the security monitor connected to the new cameras Saul had installed. The clock on the wall ticked past 5:59. My heart was beating with a steady rhythmic thud like a pile driver hitting bedrock. I took a sip of iced tea. The condensation on the glass was cold against my fingers. I was calm. I had spent 40 years managing construction sites where chaos was just one mistake away. I knew how to wait. At exactly 6 o'clock, the headlights of the silver BMW swept across the front lawn. They were punctual, I would give them that. Brent liked to run his life on a schedule because it gave him the illusion of control. I watched on the screen as the car pulled into the driveway. I saw Brent get out first, loosening his tie. He looked tired, but smug, the look of a man who had spent the day closing deals and bullying subordinates. Tasha got out of the passenger side carrying 3 shopping bags from an expensive boutique. It seemed they had already started spending the money they thought they would save by putting me in a nursing home. They walked up the path to the front porch. I could hear their muffled voices through the glass. Brent was complaining about the traffic. Tasha was laughing about something one of her friends had said. They were completely oblivious. They were walking toward a cliff edge thinking it was a sidewalk. I leaned forward in my chair. This was the moment. I heard the heavy footsteps on the wooden porch stairs, then the familiar jingle of keys. I saw Brent reach for the door handle. He didn't even look at the lock. He just jammed his key toward the hole where the old brass cylinder used to be. Clink. Metal hit metal, but it did not slide in. Brent frowned. I saw him look down. He tried again. He pushed harder, but there was no keyhole. The old lock was gone, replaced by a sleek black panel of reinforced glass and steel. A biometric scanner. "What the hell?" Brent muttered. I heard it clearly through the microphone. He stepped back and looked at the door number to make sure he was at the right house. Then he looked at the lock again. He pressed his thumb against the scanner. Access denied. The mechanical voice from the lock was loud and emotionless. A red light pulsed once. "Open the door, Tasha," he snapped. "My key is not working." Tasha stepped up, dropping one of her shopping bags. She looked confused. She dug through her purse and pulled out her key. She tried to insert it, but like Brent, she found no opening. She pressed her thumb to the glass. Access denied. I took another sip of tea. The ice cubes clinked softly. "Dad," Tasha called out. Her voice was annoyed, not worried. "Dad, open the door. The lock is broken." I did not move. I did not speak. I simply watched. Brent's annoyance turned to anger in a split second. He pounded on the door with his fist. The sound reverberated through the house, but the reinforced solid oak held firm. "Caleb," he shouted, "open this damn door right now. I know you are in there. I can see the light on. Quit playing games, old man." He kicked the bottom of the door, a scuff mark on the fresh varnish. I made a mental note to charge him for that later. I picked up my phone. I had dialed the number 5 minutes ago. I just needed to press send. 911, what is your emergency? Yes, this is Caleb Johnson at 420 Maple Avenue. There are 2 aggressive individuals on my front porch attempting to break into my property. They are screaming and kicking the door. I am an elderly man and I fear for my safety. Are they armed, sir? I do not know. The man is very agitated. He is threatening to break the door down. Please hurry. We have a unit 2 blocks away, sir. Sit tight. I hung up. Outside, the temper tantrum was escalating. Brent was now screaming at the top of his lungs. His face was a mask of red fury. He was pacing back and forth on the porch, running his hands through his gelled hair. "You useless old parasite," Brent screamed. "You changed the locks. Who gave you permission to touch my house? When I get in there, I am going to throw every single thing you own onto the street. Do you hear me?" Neighbors were starting to come out. Mrs. Higgins from across the street was peering through her blinds. The young couple next door had stopped walking their dog to watch the spectacle. Brent didn't care. His ego was bruised, and a man like Brent protects his ego with volume. Tasha was crying now, not tears of sadness, but tears of frustration. "Dad, please," she yelled, slapping the door with her open palm. "This isn't funny. I have frozen food in these bags. Open the door." Then came the blue lights. They swept across the front of the house, illuminating Brent's sweaty face in flashes of azure and crimson. A police cruiser pulled up to the curb silently. 2 officers stepped out. One was a tall man with a stern face, Officer Miller. I recognized him. I had fixed his father's roof 20 years ago for free. Brent froze. He looked at the police and then he smiled, a shark-like smile. He thought the cavalry had arrived to help him. He adjusted his tie and walked down the steps to meet them, putting on his best salesman face. "Officers, thank God you are here," Brent said, pointing back at the house. "My father-in-law has locked himself inside. He is having a senile episode. He might have dementia. We need you to help us break the door down before he hurts himself." Officer Miller didn't smile. He kept his hand near his belt. "Sir, step away from the residence. We received a call about an attempted break-in and harassment." "Break-in," Brent laughed, a short, nervous sound. No, you misunderstand. I live here. This is my house. That man inside is my guest. He has gone crazy." Please," Officer Miller said. His voice was flat, professional. Brent huffed, rolling his eyes as if this was a massive inconvenience. He pulled out his wallet and flipped it open, flashing his driver's license. Tasha did the same, her hands shaking. "This is ridiculous," Brent muttered. "When you get that door open, I want him committed. Tonight." Officer Miller took the IDs and walked back to the cruiser. His partner stood by the passenger door, hand resting on his radio, watching Brent closely. I could see Brent tapping his foot impatiently. He was already rehearsing the speech he would give me once the police let him in. He was planning his victory. Inside the house, I stood up and walked to the window. I pulled the curtain back just an inch, just enough for them to see me. Tasha saw me first. "Dad," she mouthed. "Open the door." I looked at her. I looked right through her, and then I let the curtain fall back into place. Officer Miller walked back from the cruiser. He held the licenses in his hand, but his demeanor had changed. He was no longer just cautious. He was authoritative. He stopped 3 feet from Brent. "Mr. Sterling," he said, addressing Brent. "Mrs. Sterling, I need you to vacate the premises immediately." "Excuse me," Brent said, his jaw dropping. "I ran a check on this address." Officer Miller said loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "This property is registered to the Caleb Johnson Family Trust. The sole trustee and legal resident is Caleb Johnson. Your names do not appear on the deed. They do not appear on any lease agreement. And according to Mr. Johnson, you have been asked to leave multiple times. That is a lie, Brent spat, stepping forward. I have lived here for 3 years. My mail comes here. Then you should have signed a lease, Officer Miller said, stepping forward to meet him. Without a lease or a name on the deed, you are guests. And the owner has revoked your guest privileges. You are trespassing. This is insanity, Tasha shrieked. He is my father. That is a civil matter, ma'am, the officer said, turning to her. Right now, this is a criminal matter. If you do not leave this property in the next 2 minutes, I will arrest you both for trespassing and disturbing the peace. Mr. Johnson has also indicated he will press charges for the damage to his front door. Brent looked at the door. He looked at the officer. Then he looked up at my window. His face went from red to a pale shade of gray. He realized in that moment that he had built his entire life on land he did not own. He realized that the useless old man he had mocked held the only key that mattered. Fine, Brent hissed. Fine. We will go. But this isn't over. We will be back with a lawyer in the morning. Officer Miller crossed his arms. If you come back without a court order, you will be going to jail. Have a good night. Brent turned around. He looked like a deflated balloon. He grabbed Tasha's arm roughly. Come on, he growled. Where are we going? Tasha wailed, dragging her bags. The Marriott Brent snapped. I watched them get back into the BMW. It wasn't the triumphant exit they were used to. It was a retreat, a humiliating public defeat. As they backed out of the driveway, Brent slammed his hand against the steering wheel. I walked away from the window. I went to the kitchen and rinsed my glass. I placed it in the drying rack. The house was quiet again. But now it was a peaceful silence. The air felt lighter. I opened the fridge and took out the steak I had bought for myself. I was going to cook a real dinner tonight. But I knew this was just the opening skirmish. Brent was a man who prided himself on winning. He wouldn't stop at a locked door. He would come back and he would try to hit me where he thought I was weak. My money, my mind, my reputation. Let him come. He was playing checkers. I had been playing chess for 40 years. I sat down at the kitchen table and pulled out the file I had prepared for tomorrow. The file labeled Apex Realty. If Brent thought tonight was bad, wait until he walked into his office tomorrow morning. The foundation was already cracking. I was just getting ready to swing the sledgehammer. My phone buzzed on the kitchen table. It was a notification from my bank app. Attempted transaction declined. $500 at the Ritz-Carlton. I smiled and took another bite of my steak. It was medium rare, just the way I liked it. For the first time in 5 years, I was eating a meal in my own house without listening to Brent complain about the texture of the meat or Tasha worrying about calories. The silence was delicious, but the notification on my phone was even sweeter. It told me exactly where they were and exactly what they were trying to do. They were trying to bleed me dry one last time. 30 minutes earlier, Brent had peeled out of my driveway, vowing revenge. I knew exactly where he would go. He was a man of predictable vices. When his ego was bruised, he sought luxury to soothe it. He would want the most expensive room service, the softest sheets, and the most premium whiskey to wash down the humiliation of being kicked out by an old man. He reached into his wallet and pulled out the platinum Amex card I had given Tasha 5 years ago. He thought it was an infinite well of money. He thought I was just the senile old heavy lifter who paid the bills without looking at the statements. I could see the scene in my mind as clearly as if I were standing in the lobby. Brent slamming his hand on the marble counter demanding the presidential suite. He would be loud, making sure everyone in the lobby knew he was a VIP. He would throw that black card onto the counter with a flourish. But here is the thing about concrete. It takes 28 days to fully cure, but once it does, it is harder than stone. My patience had cured. I picked up my phone and opened the banking app again. Another notification. Attempted transaction declined. This time it was Tasha's card. $300, probably for a spa treatment to calm her nerves. I had not just canceled the cards, that would have been too simple. I had reported them stolen. I had flagged all activity as fraudulent. When the receptionist at the Ritz swiped that card, the system didn't just say decline, it said call security. I imagined the look on Brent's face. The clerk probably lowered his voice and asked for another form of payment while looking at him with suspicion. Brent would turn red. He would bluster. He would yell, "Do you know who I am?" I took a sip of red wine. I knew who he was. He was a 35-year-old man with $40 in his checking account and a leased BMW he couldn't afford. For 5 years, I had quietly paid off their balances at the end of every month. It was my way of helping, my way of keeping the peace. I paid for the dinners I wasn't invited to. I paid for the suits Brent wore to interviews where he bragged about being a self-made man. I paid for the vacations where they left me at home to watch the dog. I was the silent investor in their facade of success. Tonight, the investor was pulling out. I scrolled through the transaction history on my phone. In the last month alone, they had spent $4,000 on clothes and dining. $4,000. I looked around my kitchen. The cabinets were from 1995. The linoleum was peeling in the corner. I had denied myself renovations for decades to fund their lifestyle. I tapped the screen and froze their joint checking account too, the one I deposited money into every Friday. Access denied. An hour later, my phone buzzed again. A text message from Tasha. "Dad, are you crazy? The cards are not working. We are at the hotel, and they are threatening to call the cops if we do not pay for the valet. Turn them back on right now." I deleted the message without replying. I cleaned my plate and walked into the living room. I pulled out the old photo album from the bookshelf. There was a picture of me from 1980 standing on the steel beams of the First National Bank Tower. I was young then, strong. My hands were covered in grease and dust. Beside me was a man named Joe, a foreman who taught me everything I knew about structural integrity. Joe used to say, if you build on a swamp, do not be surprised when the house sinks. I had built a life for my daughter on a swamp of easy money and zero accountability. Now I was draining the swamp. I checked the GPS tracker on the family plan. I hadn't removed them from that yet. I wanted to see where they would land. The dot on the map moved away from the Ritz-Carlton. It moved away from the downtown district. It crawled slowly toward the highway. It stopped at the Bluebird Motel. I laughed out loud. The Bluebird. I knew it well. I had fixed their septic system 10 years ago. It was a place where truckers slept for a few hours and where people went when they didn't want to be found. The sheets were thin, the walls were thinner, and the air conditioner rattled like a dying engine. This was their reality now. I could imagine the argument happening in that cramped room. Brent would be pacing on the stained carpet, kicking the cheap furniture. I can hear him now screaming at Tasha. "Your father is senile. He has lost his mind. He is a retired bricklayer, Tasha. He spent 40 years playing in the dirt. He doesn't understand finance. He doesn't understand how the world works. He thinks he can just cut us off." That was Brent's fatal flaw. He looked at my rough hands and saw a laborer. He didn't see the engineer. He didn't know that before I poured concrete, I calculated the load. He didn't know that I owned the patent on a specific type of seismic reinforcement joint used in every bridge in this state. He thought I was broke because I drove a Ford truck and wore flannel shirts. He thought the money came from a dwindling pension. He had no idea that the portfolio I managed was worth more than the real estate firm he worked for. I walked to the window and looked out at the street. The neighborhood was quiet. The house was secure. The locks were solid. For the first time in years, I did not feel the heavy weight of obligation pressing down on my chest. I felt light. But I knew Brent. I knew the way a desperate man thinks. He wouldn't take this lying down. He would try to hit back. He would try to use the one thing he thought gave him power over me, my perceived incompetence. He would go for my sanity. He would try to prove I was unfit. He would try to take the power of attorney. I went back to the table and opened my laptop. I pulled up a file I had prepared months ago. It was a complete medical evaluation from my neurologist dated last week. Clean bill of health. Cognitive function excellent. I also opened another folder. This one was labeled Apex Realty. It contained public records regarding the new commercial center Brent was trying to develop, the project that was going to make his career, the project he had leveraged everything on. I zoomed in on the survey map. The proposed site was on the corner of 5th and Main. I smiled. I knew that corner. I had worked on the foundation of the old warehouse that stood there in the 70s. We had found a sinkhole during the excavation. We had filled it, but the ground was unstable. It was a geological nightmare. Brent didn't know that. His fancy digital surveys hadn't gone deep enough, but the old man who played in the dirt knew. Tomorrow, Brent was going to go to work trying to destroy me. He didn't know that I was already 5 moves ahead. I closed the laptop and turned off the lights. I climbed the stairs to my bedroom. The bed felt big and empty without B. But tonight it also felt safe. I lay down and listened to the silence. No TV blaring downstairs, no arguments about money, no doors slamming, just the sound of a house that finally belonged to its owner again. At the Bluebird Motel, Brent was probably trying to sleep on a lumpy mattress, plotting his revenge. He was probably telling Tasha that tomorrow he would fix everything, that he would crush the old man. Let him try. You can't crush a man made of steel and concrete with a plastic hammer. I closed my eyes and slept the deep, dreamless sleep of the righteous. Tomorrow, the real demolition would begin. The next morning, I did not wake up with anger. I woke up with a plan. I dressed with the same precision I used to apply when supervising a skyscraper pour. I put on my best flannel shirt, my pressed khakis, and my polished work boots. I was not going to a construction site, but I was definitely going to demolish something. I was going to dismantle my son-in-law's career. You see, Brent was not just a greedy husband, he was a shark in a cheap suit. He worked for Apex Realty, the biggest commercial developer in the state. For months, he had been hinting about a massive project called the Centurion, a sprawling shopping complex that was going to revitalize the district. He bragged about the commission check he would get. He bragged that it would buy him a Porsche. What he never mentioned was that the centerpiece of the Centurion project was my land. My house sat on the corner lot, the critical access point for the entire development. Brent had promised his bosses he could deliver the property for free by taking over my assets. He had sold Skin of the Bear before he even shot the bear. I drove my old Ford truck to the glass and steel tower of Apex Realty downtown. I parked right next to the row of Mercedes and Teslas. The valet looked at my truck with disdain, but I tossed him a $20 bill and walked past him. The lobby was cold and sterile. The receptionist, a young woman with too much makeup, barely looked up from her screen. "Can I help you, sir? Deliveries are in the back," she said, popping her gum. "I am not a delivery man," I said, my voice echoing off the marble floors. "I am here to see David Sterling." She laughed, a short, condescending sound. "Mr. Sterling is the CEO. He does not see walk-ins. Do you have an appointment?" "Tell him Caleb Johnson is here," I said, leaning my heavy hands on the desk. "Tell him the man who taught him how to read a seismic survey is standing in his lobby." She hesitated, looking at the stern expression on my face. She picked up the phone. A moment later, her eyes went wide. She hung up and swallowed hard. "Mr. Sterling says to send you right up. Top floor." I stepped into the elevator. As the numbers climbed, I thought about David. 30 years ago, he was just a skinny intern on my job site. I was the one who pulled him out of the way of a swinging steel beam. I was the one who taught him that integrity is the only material that never cracks. Now he ran the city's biggest real estate firm. I wondered if he still remembered the lessons. The elevator doors opened. David was waiting for me. He was older now, wearing a suit that cost more than my truck, but his smile was genuine. "Caleb Johnson," he boomed, extending his hand. "I have not seen you since the stadium project. You look like you could still bend a rebar with your bare hands." We shook hands. His grip was firm. "I am getting old, David," I said, "but my eyes still work." Come in," David said, ushering me past a row of glass offices. As we walked down the hallway, I saw him. Brent. He was in a conference room pitching to a group of investors. He was pointing at a digital map on the wall, a map that showed my house flattened into a parking lot. He looked up and saw me walking with the CEO. His jaw dropped. He stopped mid-sentence. I didn't acknowledge him. I kept walking. In David's office, I declined the coffee. I placed a rolled-up tube of paper on his mahogany desk. "I heard about the Centurion project, David," I said, unrolling the paper. "It is ambitious." David nodded, leaning back. "It is our flagship, Caleb. We are closing the land acquisition this week. Your son-in-law, Brent, says he has the corner lot secured." I smoothed out the paper. It was a geological survey map from 1985, hand-drawn and stamped with my engineer's seal. "Brent is a salesman, David," I said, pointing to a red-shaded area on the map. "He looks at the surface. I look at what is underneath." David leaned forward, frowning. "What am I looking at?" "You are looking at a limestone karst system," I explained, tapping the map. "My property and the 3 lots adjacent to it sit on top of a network of hollow caves. If you pour a foundation for a 3-story commercial complex here without spending $10 million on pilings, the whole thing will sink into the earth within 5 years. David's face went pale. He snatched his reading glasses and scrutinized the map. "Our modern surveys didn't show this," he muttered. "Modern surveys use satellite data," I said. They miss the deep voids. I was there when we drilled the test bores 30 years ago. I kept these records because I knew one day someone would try to build something heavy here. You can't build the Centurion on my land, David. It is a death trap. David sat back, exhaling a long breath. He looked at me with a mix of horror and gratitude. If we had broken ground, if the foundation had cracked, the lawsuits would have bankrupted us. I rolled up the map. I am not here to ruin your project, David. I am here to save you from a mistake, and to let you know that my property is not for sale. Not now. Not ever. David stood up. He looked furious, but not at me. He pressed the intercom button on his desk. His voice was ice cold. Send Brent in here, now. I stood up to leave. You stick around, Caleb, David said. I want you to hear this. No, I said, putting on my hat. I did what I came to do. You run your company, David. I just need to go fix a leaky faucet. I walked out of the office just as Brent was rushing in. He looked sweaty. He looked panicked. What are you doing here? He hissed at me, grabbing my arm in the hallway. You senile old bat, did you embarrass me? I pulled my arm away. His grip was weak. I just saved your boss $10 million, Brent, I said calmly. You should thank me. I walked to the elevator. Behind me, I heard the heavy door of the CEO's office slam shut. Then I heard David's voice muffled but thundering through the glass. You didn't do your due diligence, Brent. You almost destroyed this firm. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. As the doors closed, I saw Brent standing in the glass box of an office. His head hung low while David threw a file onto the desk. It was a beautiful sight. But as I walked back to my truck, I knew this wasn't the end. A wounded animal is dangerous. Brent wouldn't see this as a professional failure. He would see it as a declaration of war. He would blame me for his incompetence. My phone buzzed as I started the engine. It was a text from Tasha. Dad, what did you do? Brent is coming home. He is screaming. He says he is going to have you declared incompetent by Monday. He says you are dangerous. Please, Dad, just apologize. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. Apologize. That was the problem with my daughter's generation. They thought consequences were something you could just apologize away. I put the truck in gear. I wasn't going home to apologize. I was going home to prepare for the next wave. Brent was coming for my mind now. He wanted to prove I was crazy. Well, let him try. I had handled inspections from federal regulators that were scarier than him. If he wanted to play doctor, I would be happy to give him a lesson in anatomy. Specifically, the part where I kick his ass out of my life permanently. They say the most dangerous structural failure is the one you cannot see. It is not the cracked beam or the sagging roof that kills you. It is the dry rot. It eats away at the wood from the inside out, leaving the surface looking perfect until the moment you put weight on it and the whole thing turns to dust. 2 days after I humiliated Brent at his office, I received a phone call. It was Tasha. Dad, she sobbed into the phone. Her voice was thick with tears. I am so sorry. I do not know what happened. Brent has been under so much pressure and I miss you, Dad. Please, can we meet? Just you and me. No, Brent. I just want to see my father. I held the phone to my ear and listened to the sound of my daughter crying. A part of me, the part that remembered holding her when she scraped her knee, wanted to rush to her, wanted to fix it. But the other part of me, the part that had spent 40 years negotiating with crooked subcontractors, heard something else. I heard the pitch. I heard the desperate tone of a woman who was not sorry for what she did, but sorry for what she had lost. Okay, Tasha, I said, keeping my voice level. Where do you want to meet? The Coffee Bean on 4th, she said, sniffing. In an hour, please, Dad. I hung up. I did not feel relief. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was the same feeling I used to get when I walked onto a job site where the crew was cutting corners. Something was not right. Brent does not just give up. He does not send his wife to wave a white flag unless he has a sniper hidden in the bushes. I arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early. I sat in my truck and watched. It was a habit from the old days. Assess the site before you start the work. I saw Tasha arrive. She looked nervous. She checked her reflection in the window 3 times before going in. But she was not alone. 2 minutes after she entered, a man in a gray suit walked in. He was carrying a leather briefcase and moved with the self-importance of a man who charges by the hour. I recognized the type immediately. He wasn't a construction lawyer. He looked like a doctor, the kind of doctor who testifies in court for whichever side pays him more. He sat at a table 2 spots away from where Tasha had set up. He opened a notebook and placed a pen perfectly parallel to the binding. The setup was clumsy. It lacked elegance. I took a deep breath and walked in. Dad Tasha stood up when she saw me. She hugged me. Her perfume was overpowering, but underneath it I could smell the sharp tang of fear. She was trembling. I sat down. I looked tired. I let my shoulders slump. I wanted them to think their plan was working before it even started. "I ordered you a water," Tasha said, pushing a glass toward me, "and a blueberry muffin, your favorite." "Thank you, sweetie," I said. My voice sounded frail, intentional. I looked at the water. It was clear, innocent. The ice cubes clinked against the glass. I reached for it. As I brought the glass to my lips, I paused. In construction, you work with chemicals, solvents, epoxies, stripping agents. Over 40 years, your nose becomes a spectrograph. You learn to smell a gas leak before the meter picks it up. You learn to smell wet drywall before the mold appears. I smelled it immediately. It was faint, a slightly bitter metallic scent rising from the water. Benzodiazepine, or maybe a mild sedative, enough to make an old man slur his words, enough to make him look confused, enough to make him look like he needed to be put away. My heart broke. Brent attacking me was war. I expected that. But Tasha trying to drug me, that was not war. That was parricide. She was trying to kill the person I was, so they could control the shell that remained. I looked at her. She was smiling a tight, forced smile. "Drink your water, Dad," she said. "You look dehydrated." I looked past her to the man in the gray suit. He was watching us over the top of his menu. He was waiting for the show to start. I needed to give them a show. "Oh, look, Tasha," I said, pointing out the window behind her. "Is that your friend Sarah?" Tasha turned around quickly. "Sarah where?" In that split second, I moved with the speed of a man half my age. I poured the contents of my glass into the dense potted fern sitting on the divider next to our table. It took less than a second. I brought the empty glass back to my lips and tilted my head back, pretending to swallow. "Ah, that is better," I said, wiping my mouth. Tasha turned back. "I do not see her, Dad." "My mistake," I said. "My eyes are not what they used to be." I watched her shoulders relax. She thought I had swallowed the bait. Now I just had to wait for the imaginary drug to kick in. "So, Tasha," I said, leaning back, "why are we here?" "I just wanted to apologize, Dad," she said, reaching for my hand. "Brent has been difficult, but we worry about you, living in that big house all alone. Maybe it is too much for you." I let my eyelids droop. I let a small tremor enter my hand. "The house," I mumbled. "Yes, the house is big. Sometimes I get lost in the hallway." Tasha's eyes lit up. She glanced at the man in the gray suit. He was writing furiously in his notebook. "You get lost." "Dad," she asked, pressing, "do you forget where you are?" I looked at the muffin. I poked it with my finger. "Who is B?" I asked. "Where is B?" Tasha squeezed my hand. "Dad, Mom died 3 years ago. Do you remember?" I stared blankly at the wall. "B is coming back," I said softly. "She went to the store. She went to buy concrete." The man in the gray suit stood up. He walked over to our table as if it were a coincidence. "Excuse me," he said, his voice slick with false concern. "I couldn't help but overhear. Is everything all right here?" Tasha looked up, feigning surprise. "Oh, my father. He is just having a moment." He gets confused. "I am Dr. Eris," the man said, pulling out a card. "I specialize in geriatric cognitive decline. It looks like your father is experiencing a classic dissociative episode." I looked at Dr. Eris. I looked at his expensive watch. I looked at his perfectly manicured hands. He had never held a shovel in his life. He was a hired gun here to certify that Caleb Johnson was mentally incompetent so his son-in-law could seize his assets. "Who are you?" I slurred, letting my head roll to the side. "Are you the inspector? The foundation is good." I checked the rebar. Dr. Eris nodded gravely, looking at Tasha. "It is advanced. Look at the pupil dilation. The confusion. He thinks he is on a construction site. This is dangerous behavior, Mrs. Sterling. He could hurt himself or others." Tasha looked down at me. For a second I saw a flicker of guilt in her eyes, but then she thought about the Malibu beach house. She thought about the approval of her husband, and the guilt vanished. "What should we do, doctor?" she asked. "I can sign a temporary evaluation right now," Dr. Aris said, pulling a form from his briefcase. "An emergency hold. We can get him into a facility tonight for his own safety. Once he is secure, you can file for conservatorship." They were talking about me like I was a piece of furniture to be moved. I let my head drop onto the table. I closed my eyes. "Excellent reaction to the stimulus," Dr. Aris noted. "He is lethargic. The brain is shutting down." I listened to the scratch of his pen on the paper. Every stroke was a nail in the coffin of our relationship. "Okay," Tasha whispered. "Do it. Sign the paper." I counted to 10 in my head. I needed them to commit. I needed the signature on the paper. I needed the crime to be complete. "There," Dr. Aris said. "Doctor, I have certified that he is a danger to himself. We should call an ambulance." "No," Tasha said quickly. "Brent is coming with the car. We will take him." I heard my phone buzz in my pocket. It was recording. It had been recording since I walked in. I lifted my head slowly. I opened my eyes. I dropped the act. The fog cleared from my face. My posture straightened. The tremor in my hand vanished. I looked at Dr. Aris with a gaze that could cut steel. "Dr. Aris," I said, my voice clear and strong, "before you call that ambulance, you might want to check the potted fern next to you." Dr. Aris froze. "What?" I pointed to the plant. "It looks a little sleepy, don't you think? Probably because it just drank about 6 ounces of water laced with sedatives." Tasha gasped. She pulled her hand away from mine as if I were fire. "Dad," she stammered. You are awake." "I have been awake since 1975, Tasha," I said, standing up. I looked down at the doctor. "And you. Dr. Aris, is it?" "Doctor. I assume that is not your real name, or if it is, your medical license is about to be revoked. Diagnosing a patient you have never examined based on a theatrical performance. That is malpractice, conspiracy, and fraud." Dr. Aris slammed his notebook shut. He looked at Tasha with panic. "You said he was senile. You said he was gone. He lied to you too," I said, smiling. "Just like he lies to everyone." I picked up the glass of water. There was a single drop left in the bottom. "I am taking this glass," I said. "And I am going straight to the police lab. And then I am going to get a blood test. When it comes back clean and this glass comes back dirty, you and Brent are going to have a very hard time explaining why you tried to poison a 70-year-old man." Tasha started to cry again, real tears this time, tears of terror. "Dad, no, wait. It wasn't my idea. Brent made me do it. He said it was the only way." I looked at her. I looked at the daughter I had raised. And I realized I had built a house with a fatal flaw. I had built it with love, but I had forgotten to reinforce the spine. "You made a choice, Tasha," I said. "You chose him." I turned to walk away. Dr. Aris tried to block my path. "Now look here, Mr. Johnson," he started. "Move," I said. It was one word, but it carried the weight of 40 years of commanding men who moved mountains. Dr. Aris moved. I walked out of the coffee shop into the bright sunlight. I felt sick to my stomach, my own daughter. I got into my truck and locked the door. I looked at the glass in the passenger seat. The evidence. I did not go to the police station immediately. I went to the hospital. I needed that blood test on official record. As the nurse drew the blood, I looked at the dark red vial. It was the same blood that ran through Tasha's veins. But somewhere along the line, the mixture had gone wrong. My phone buzzed. It was Brent. "Where are you?" he texted. "We are waiting." I typed back a single message. "The fern is asleep. I am wide awake. See you in court." I put the phone down. The sadness was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. They wanted to play games with my health. They wanted to declare me unfit. Fine. If they wanted to see a crazy old man, I would show them what crazy looked like. Crazy was taking on a man who knew where every single skeleton was buried because he was the one who dug the holes. I thanked the nurse and walked out. I had one more stop to make. The city water department. Brent had tried to cut off my mind. I was about to cut off his flow. Literally. The darkness behind my closed eyelids was not peaceful. It was a theater of betrayal. I lay with my head resting on the cool laminate of the coffee shop table, my breathing shallow and rhythmic, just as I had seen men do when they were knocked out by heat exhaustion on a job site. But my mind was a racing engine. I felt Tasha's hand on my shoulder, but it was not a touch of comfort. It was a test. She was checking to see if the drug had taken hold. "He is out," she whispered. Her voice was shaking, but not with fear. It was shaking with adrenaline. "Good, Dr. Eris said." His voice was no longer professional. It was bored. "I signed the emergency committal form. You have 72 hours before a judge reviews it. Get him to the facility and get the power of attorney notarized. My invoice will be in your email by tonight." I heard the scrape of a chair and the sound of footsteps walking away. The doctor was gone. He had done his dirty work and left the cleanup to the family. Then I heard the heavy footsteps I knew better than my own heartbeat. Brent. He must have been waiting in the parking lot, watching through the glass like a vulture circling a dying animal. The bell above the door jingled as he walked in. "Is he out?" Brent asked. "No, hello? No, is he okay?" "Just is he out?" "Out cold," Tasha replied. She sounded relieved. "God, Brent, I thought he was going to catch us." He started talking about the fern and looking at the water. My heart almost stopped. "He is senile," Tasha Brent scoffed. "His paranoia is just a symptom. Look at him, drooling on the table like a baby." I felt Brent's hand grab my hair and pull my head back. It took every ounce of my discipline not to drive my fist into his throat right then and there. He lifted my eyelid with a rough thumb. I rolled my eyes back into my head, playing the part. "Lights are on, but nobody is home." Brent laughed, letting my head drop back onto the table with a thud. "Perfect," he said, rubbing his hands together. "Let us get him to the car. We need to stop by the house first." "The house?" Tasha asked. "I thought we were taking him straight to Happy Hills." "We need the deed," Tasha Brent hissed. "And the banking codes. They are in his safe. If he is this out of it, we can use his thumb to open the biometric locks he installed. We get in, we get the papers, we transfer the funds, and then we dump him at the nursing home. By the time he wakes up, he will be a ward of the state, and we will be shopping for furniture." I listened to every word. Each syllable was a sledgehammer, chipping away at the love I had held for them. "Grab his feet," Brent ordered. They dragged me out of the coffee shop. I made myself heavy. Dead weight. I wanted them to struggle. I wanted them to sweat. They grunted and cursed as they hauled me into the back seat of Brent's BMW. They shoved me in like a bag of cement, my legs twisted at an awkward angle. As we drove, I kept my eyes closed, but my ears were wide open. "I cannot wait to get rid of that smell," Tasha said from the front seat. "What smell?" Brent asked. "That old man smell," she said. "That mix of sawdust and menthol ointment. It makes me sick. I have been holding my breath every time I hug him for years. The ointment, the balm I used on my joints because I destroyed my knees carrying her on my shoulders. The sawdust that coated my lungs because I spent my life building the roof over her head. To her it was just a stench. To me it was the scent of sacrifice." "Do not worry, babe," Brent said, patting her leg. "Once we sell the house and that ugly truck, we are going to Malibu. Ocean breeze. No more sawdust, just salt water and cocktails. Malibu." They were selling my life's work for a beach house they hadn't earned. The car stopped. I heard the familiar sound of my own driveway gravel crunching under the tires. "Okay, listen to me," Brent said, turning off the engine. "We have to be fast. The neighbors are nosy. We drag him to the porch, use his thumb on the scanner. Get inside, dump him on the couch, and find that safe." They hauled me out of the car. My boots dragged on the pavement. They pulled me up the steps. I felt Brent grab my right hand. He jammed my thumb against the glass of the scanner I had installed just days ago. "Beep. Welcome home, Caleb." The mechanical voice was the only welcome I received. "See?" Brent whispered. "Easy. Technology is great when you control it." They dragged me into the living room and dumped me onto the leather sofa. I landed hard, but I did not flinch. "Start looking," Brent barked. "Check the desk. Check under the floorboards in the bedroom. I will check the basement." I heard them tearing my house apart. Drawers were ripped open and dumped onto the floor. Books were swept off shelves. It sounded like a pack of wild dogs had been let loose. I waited. I lay there listening to the destruction, counting the seconds. I needed them to be deep in the act. I needed them to feel secure in their victory. "Found it," Tasha yelled from the dining room. I found the box. I heard Brent running up the stairs from the basement. He rushed into the dining room. "Let me see," he panted. I opened my eyes. I sat up slowly. I adjusted my flannel shirt. I brushed a piece of lint off my trousers. I stood up and walked silently to the doorway of the dining room. They were huddled over my steel lockbox, the one I kept my will and the deed in. Tasha was trying to pry it open with a screwdriver. Brent was cheering her on. "You are going to strip the screw, Tasha," I said. My voice was calm, deep. The voice of a foreman catching a rookie making a mistake. They both froze. It was comical. They turned around in slow motion, their faces pale, their eyes wide with terror. It was as if a ghost had walked into the room. Dad, Tasha squeaked, dropping the screwdriver. It clattered on the hardwood floor. You are awake," Brent stammered. The doctor said. "The doctor is an idiot, Brent," I said, stepping into the room. "And so are you." I walked over to the table and picked up the steel box. I dusted it off. "You really thought I would drink anything you gave me?" I asked, looking at Tasha. "After you tried to steal my house, after you called the police on me, you think I am that stupid?" "I didn't drink the water, Tasha. I gave it to the plant. The only thing you poisoned today was the last shred of love I had left for you." Brent's shock was turning into aggression. He realized he was cornered. He realized his plan had failed. He puffed out his chest, trying to intimidate me. "Give me that box, Caleb," he growled, stepping forward. "I do not care if you are awake. You are old. You are weak. I am taking that house." He lunged for me. I did not move. I did not flinch, because I saw the shadow move in the hallway behind him. Before Brent could touch me, a hand the size of a shovel clamped onto his shoulder. Saul stepped out of the shadows. He was wearing his dark work coveralls, his tool belt hanging heavy on his hips. He was 65, but he had spent 40 years swinging a sledgehammer. He was built like a brick wall. "I wouldn't do that," son Saul rumbled. His voice sounded like gravel grinding in a mixer. Brent yelped, trying to pull away, but Saul's grip was iron. "Who the hell is this?" Brent screamed. "This is Saul," I said calmly. "He is my locksmith. And tonight, he is my trash removal service." I looked at Tasha. She was backing away, shaking her head. "Dad, please," she cried. "We can explain." "Explain what, Tasha?" I asked, cutting her off. "Explain that you hate the smell of the father who raised you. Explain that you want to trade my life for a beach house in Malibu." I heard every word in the car. Every single word. Tasha covered her mouth, sobbing. I walked up to her. I looked her in the eye. "You said you wanted to get rid of the smell, Tasha. Well, you are in luck, because you are never going to smell it again." I turned to Saul. "Saul, escort them out. If they resist, call Officer Miller. I believe breaking and entering plus attempted kidnapping is a felony." "Let go of me," Brent shouted, struggling against Saul. "This is my house." "No, son," Saul said, spinning Brent around and marching him toward the door. "This is Caleb's house. You were just a termite living in the walls." We walked them to the front door, the same door they had dragged me through 10 minutes ago. Saul threw Brent out onto the porch. He landed hard, rolling onto the grass. Tasha followed, stumbling in her high heels, clutching her purse. I stood in the doorway. The porch light cast long shadows across their defeated faces. "Dad," Tasha wailed, reaching out to me. "Dad, please, where are we supposed to go?" I looked at her. I thought about the little girl in pigtails. Then I thought about the woman who poured poison into my water. "Go to Malibu," I said. "I hear the weather is nice this time of year." I slammed the heavy oak door shut. I turned the deadbolt. Then I engaged the biometric lock. Beep. Secured. I leaned my back against the door and slid down until I was sitting on the floor. My heart was pounding. My hands were shaking not from fear but from the adrenaline leaving my body. Saul walked over and handed me a bottle of water. A sealed bottle. "You okay, boss?" he asked. I took the water. I drank half of it in one gulp. "I am okay, Saul," I said. The foundation held. Saul nodded. He looked around at the mess they had made in the living room, the overturned drawers, the scattered papers. "We have some cleanup to do," he said. "Yeah," I said, standing up. "We do, but the trash is already outside." I walked to the window and looked out. The BMW was peeling away, leaving rubber marks on the pavement. They were gone. But I knew this wasn't over. A man like Brent doesn't accept defeat. He escalates. He had failed to take my house. He had failed to take my mind. Now he would try to destroy the ground I walked on. I looked at the clock. It was late, but tomorrow was a new day, and I had a feeling that tomorrow Brent was going to try something desperate, something dangerous. He was going to try to cut my water. I smiled grimly. Let him try. He was about to find out that when you dig a hole to bury someone else, you usually end up falling in it yourself. The courtroom smelled of floor wax and cheap coffee. It was a smell I hated. It reminded me of the days I spent fighting zoning boards and city inspectors who wanted bribes to approve perfectly safe blueprints. But today, I was not fighting for a building permit. I was fighting for my life. I sat at the defendant's table next to Isaac. Isaac Goldblum has been my lawyer for 40 years. He is 5 feet tall, wears suits that went out of style in the 70s, and looks like a grandfather who should be feeding pigeons in the park. But I knew the truth. Isaac was a pit bull. He didn't bark. He just bit you in the jugular and didn't let go until you bled out. On the other side of the aisle sat Brent and Tasha. Brent was wearing his best navy blue suit, trying to look like the grieving, concerned son-in-law. Tasha was staring at her hands, refusing to look at me. She looked smaller today. Guilt does that to a person. It shrinks you from the inside out. The judge was a stern woman, with glasses perched on the end of her nose. Judge Patterson. I knew her reputation. She didn't like drama. She liked facts. Brent's lawyer stood up first. He was young, slick, and spoke with the kind of rehearsed empathy that made my skin crawl. Your Honor, he began. We are here today with heavy hearts. This is not about money. This is about safety. Mr. Johnson is a beloved father and grandfather, but his mental state has deteriorated rapidly. He has become paranoid, aggressive, and violent. We are asking for emergency guardianship to ensure he receives the medical care he desperately needs. He gestured to a screen set up in the corner. We have video evidence of a violent episode that occurred just last week. The video played. It was grainy footage taken from a cell phone. It showed me in my living room holding a sledgehammer. In the video, I was swinging the hammer into the drywall, screaming. To an outsider, it looked like madness. It looked like an old man destroying his own home in a fit of rage. I watched Brent smirk. He thought he had me. What the video did not show was the context. It did not show that I had found a dangerous electrical short behind that wall. It did not show that I was rushing to open the wall to prevent a fire because Brent had hired a cheap, unlicensed handyman to install a dimmer switch. I wasn't screaming in rage. I was yelling for Tasha to cut the main breaker. But without sound and without context, I looked like a monster. The video ended. Silence filled the room. We also have a medical evaluation. Brent's lawyer continued, holding up a piece of paper. Dr. Aris, a specialist in geriatric care, observed Mr. Johnson 2 days ago. His report indicates severe cognitive decline, paranoid delusions, and a disconnect from reality. Judge Patterson looked at the report. She looked at me. Mr. Johnson, she said, do you have anything to say? I started to stand up, but Isaac put a hand on my arm. His grip was surprisingly strong. Sit down, Caleb, he whispered. Let me handle the demolition. Isaac stood up slowly, buttoning his jacket. He didn't walk to the podium. He stood right there, leaning on his cane. Your Honor. Isaac said, his voice raspy but clear. My client does not deny swinging a hammer. He is a structural engineer. He swings hammers for a living. And if Mr. Sterling had included the audio in that video, you would hear my client shouting, fire in the wall. He was saving the house, not destroying it. Brent's lawyer jumped up. Objection. Speculation. Overruled, the judge said, leaning forward. Continue, Mr. Goldblum. As for the medical report, Isaac continued, picking up a piece of paper from his own file. We find it very interesting. Dr. Aris diagnosed my client in a coffee shop in under 10 minutes without running a single test. That alone is grounds for a malpractice suit. But what is more interesting is why my client appeared confused during that meeting. Isaac walked over to the bench and handed the judge a document. This is a toxicology report from Mercy Hospital taken 1 hour after the meeting at the coffee shop. It shows high levels of benzodiazepine in Mr. Johnson's blood, a sedative. The courtroom went deadly silent. I saw Tasha flinch physically as if she had been slapped. Brent went pale. Isaac turned to look at them. His eyes were not kind. My client didn't have a dementia episode. Your Honor, he was drugged, poisoned by his own daughter and son-in-law in an attempt to fabricate a medical crisis. They didn't want to help him. They wanted to incapacitate him so they could access his bank accounts. Judge Patterson read the report. Her face turned red. She looked up at Brent. Her eyes were lasers. Is this true? She asked. Her voice was quiet but terrifying. Brent stood up, stammering. "No, Your Honor, that is a lie. He must have taken the pills himself. He is crazy. He is trying to frame us." "Sit down, Mr. Sterling," the judge barked. She turned back to the papers. She flipped through them aggressively. "Mr. Sterling," she said, "this court is designed to protect the vulnerable. It is not a weapon for you to use to steal your father-in-law's estate. The evidence here is overwhelming. The application for guardianship is denied with prejudice." She banged her gavel. It sounded like a gunshot. "But I am not finished," she added. "I am forwarding this file to the district attorney's office. If this toxicology report is accurate, you two are looking at charges for assault and attempted fraud. Get out of my courtroom." Brent looked like he was going to vomit. Tasha was openly weeping now, burying her face in her hands. I stood up. I felt 10 pounds lighter. Isaac patted me on the back. "Good job, Caleb," he said. The foundation held. We walked out of the courtroom. In the hallway, Brent was waiting. He wasn't crying anymore. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold snake like hatred. He was cornered, and a cornered rat is the most dangerous kind. "You think you won," Brent hissed, stepping into my path. "You think because you have a smart lawyer and some blood work you are safe." "Get out of my way, Brent," I said. "I am done talking to you." "You can keep the house, old man," Brent whispered, leaning in close. "But you won't be able to live in it. You think you know about construction. You think you know about pressure. You have no idea what is coming. If I can't have that land, nobody can." He turned and stormed off, his expensive shoes clicking on the marble floor. Tasha trailed behind him, looking like a ghost. I watched them go. Isaac stood beside me, watching them too. "He is threatening you, Caleb," Isaac said. "You should get a restraining order." "Paper won't stop a man like that," I said, shaking my head. "He is desperate, Isaac. He promised that land to his bosses. He leveraged his career on it. He isn't going to stop until the house is gone." "Then what will you do?" Isaac asked. I adjusted my collar. "I am going to go home," I said. "And I am going to prepare for a siege. He thinks he can break my house. He forgets that I am the one who knows where the weak points are. And if he tries to strike, he is going to find out that concrete hits back." I drove home alone. The victory in court tasted sweet, but it had a bitter aftertaste. My daughter had sat there and watched her husband accuse me of being insane. She knew I was drugged. She knew I was the victim. And she said nothing. That silence was the final severance. The last emotional tie I had to her snapped. I was no longer a father. I was a fortress commander. When I got home, I didn't relax. I went straight to the basement. I checked the main water line. I checked the gas main. I checked the electrical panel. Brent's threat was not empty. He said if he couldn't have the land, nobody could. That meant he was going to try to devalue the property, make it unlivable, destruction. I walked the perimeter of my property. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lawn. I stopped at the back corner where the main municipal water pipe connected to my land. It was an old pipe, iron, rusty but solid. If that pipe broke, it wouldn't just flood my yard. It would wash away the soil stability for the entire block. I stood there looking at the ground. I felt a vibration, a low hum. My construction instincts kicked in. That wasn't the wind. That was the sound of heavy machinery. I looked down the hill toward the construction site of the new condos Brent's company was building. An excavator was moving. It was moving late in the day, and it was moving toward the easement that bordered my property. I narrowed my eyes. So that was it. Plan B. He wasn't going to break in. He wasn't going to sue me. He was going to cause an accident. A catastrophic infrastructure failure that would force the city to condemn my land. I pulled out my phone and called Saul. "Saul," I said, "bring the crew back. And bring the trench shoring gear. Tonight we dig." If Brent wanted to play in the dirt, I would show him the difference between a real estate agent with a shovel and an engineer with a plan. He was about to break a pipe, but I was about to break his entire world. They say water always follows the path of least resistance, but in my line of work I learned that water is also the most destructive force on Earth. It can carve canyons through stone, and it can bring down a skyscraper if you give it enough time. Brent did not have time. He was impatient. He wanted to wash me out of my house like a spider down a drain. He thought that by cutting my water supply, he would force me to surrender. He thought that without water, the old man would have to leave. It happened at 3 a.m. I was awake because I am always awake now. I was sitting in the dark studying the schematics of the city grid when I felt the house shudder. It wasn't an earthquake. It was a vibration deep in the earth. A low groan followed by a sound I knew too well. The sound of high-pressure metal rupturing. Then came the hiss, a sound like 1,000 snakes released at once. I grabbed my flashlight and ran to the front porch. What I saw made my blood run cold. My front yard was gone. In its place was a geyser of muddy water shooting 20 feet into the air. It was tearing up the lawn I had planted 30 years ago. It was washing away the azaleas Bee had loved. But it wasn't just my yard. The water was flowing fast, thick with mud and silt, pouring out into the street. The streetlights flickered and died. I saw the asphalt of the main road begin to buckle. The ground beneath the pavement was liquefying. A sinkhole was forming right in front of my driveway. I saw a dark figure sprinting away down the street, jumping into a waiting truck. I didn't need to see his face to know who sent him. Brent didn't have the guts to swing the pickaxe himself, but he had the money to hire someone who did. Neighbors were coming out of their houses in their bathrobes screaming. Mrs. Higgins was yelling that her basement was flooding. I didn't panic. Panic is for amateurs. I went into crisis management mode. I ran to the garage. I didn't grab a phone to call the city. By the time the city crew arrived, the whole street would be gone. I grabbed my waders. I grabbed my heavy-duty pipe wrench. I grabbed the headlamp I used for spelunking inspections. I pulled on the rubber suit. It smelled of old rubber and hard work. I strapped the tool belt around my waist. The weight of the steel was comforting. I walked out into the deluge. The water was freezing cold. It hit me with the force of a fire hose, but I planted my boots in the mud and marched forward. "Mr. Johnson, what are you doing?" a neighbor yelled. "Get back. It is dangerous." "Go inside," I roared over the sound of the rushing water. "Go inside and fill your bathtubs before the pressure drops to zero." I waded toward the source of the geyser. It was the main valve access point at the edge of my property line. The ground was unstable. Mud sucked at my boots, trying to pull me down. I found the manhole cover. It was dislodged, dancing on top of the column of water. I took a deep breath. I had to go down. I slid into the hole. The water was up to my chest immediately. It was dark, and it smelled of iron and wet earth. I turned on my headlamp. The beam cut through the murky water, illuminating the chaos below. I saw the pipe. It was the main 12-inch supply line. Someone had taken a sledgehammer to the valve coupling. It was a jagged, brutal break. But as I wiped the mud from my goggles, I saw something else. Something that shouldn't be there. Behind the fractured main pipe, there was a secondary pipe. A modern blue PVC pipe grafted onto the old iron system with a clumsy, illegal bypass valve. It was hidden deep in the shadows of the access tunnel, buried under years of sediment. I stopped moving. I stared at the blue pipe. I knew that gauge of pipe. It was industrial grade, high capacity. I traced it with my light. It ran away from my house. It ran south, south toward the hill, south toward the only construction project big enough to need that kind of drainage capacity. The Centurion, Brent's project. My mind raced, connecting the dots faster than a computer. Brent's company had been building those luxury condos for 6 months. They had been complaining about the cost of connecting to the city's sewage grid, which was miles away. So they had cheated. They had dug a secret line and tapped into the old storm drain system that ran under my property. They were using my land as a toilet for their luxury high-rise. They were dumping their runoff into the city's clean water infrastructure illegally to save millions. And by breaking my water main, Brent had just exposed his own dirty secret. The water level was rising. I had to act fast. I looked at the fracture. I couldn't fix the iron pipe without a welding crew. The street was going to flood no matter what. But I could do something about the blue pipe. I reached for the bypass valve on the blue PVC line. It was stiff with corrosion. If I am right, I whispered to myself in the dark, if I close this valve, the backup won't go into the street. It will go back where it came from. I gripped the wheel of the valve with my wrench. I applied pressure. My muscles burned. I gritted my teeth, thinking of Tasha's betrayal, thinking of Brent's arrogance, thinking of the doctor they hired to steal my mind. I channeled every ounce of my rage into my arms. The valve screeched, metal grinding against plastic. It turned, once, twice. I spun it until it locked shut. I had just capped the sewage output for a 20-story building. Physics is a beautiful thing. When you block a high-pressure output, the pressure has to go somewhere. It travels backward. It finds the path of least resistance. And the path of least resistance was now the basement toilets and the luxury showers of the Centurion model units. I climbed out of the hole just as the sirens started to wail in the distance. I was covered in mud, soaking wet and shivering. But I was smiling. The street was a mess. The asphalt was ruined. Brent had succeeded in causing thousands of dollars of damage to the neighborhood, but he had no idea what he had just done to himself. I walked back to my garage. I peeled off the waders. I washed the mud from my face. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of whiskey. I sat by the window and waited for the police. When Officer Miller arrived, he looked at the destruction. "Who did this, Caleb?" he asked, shaking his head. "I don't know who swung the hammer," I said, taking a sip of whiskey. "But I know who hired him, and I know what they broke." I handed Officer Miller a diagram I had just drawn on a napkin. "You might want to call the EPA officer," I said, "and you might want to send a patrol car down to the Apex Realty construction site. I have a feeling they are about to have a very messy plumbing emergency." Officer Miller looked at the napkin. He looked at me. "You found an illegal tap?" he asked. "I found the smoking gun," I said, "and I just pulled the trigger." 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It wasn't a text, it was a news alert. Breaking news. Massive sewage backup reported at the Centurion luxury condo development. Model units flooded. Structural damage suspected. I laughed. It was a dry, harsh laugh. Brent wanted to cut off my water. Instead, he just drowned his own career in shit. I watched the red and blue lights flashing on my ceiling. The city crews were arriving to fix the street. They would find the illegal pipe. They would trace it back to Apex Realty. The fines would be astronomical. The criminal charges would be severe. Brent wasn't just fired now, he was finished. But I wasn't done. I went to my safe and pulled out the deed again. I looked at the property line. The sinkhole was on my land. Technically, the city would need my permission to bring in the heavy equipment to fix it. I wasn't going to give it. Not until I had a face-to-face with the CEO of Apex Realty. I was going to hold the city's infrastructure hostage until I got what I wanted, and what I wanted was simple. I wanted Brent to come here. I wanted him to stand in the mud, and I wanted him to apologize to me in front of the entire neighborhood. I took another sip of whiskey. The water was still rushing outside, but inside the house it was quiet. I am Caleb Johnson. I build things. And tonight I just built a trap that no rat can escape from. There is a saying in the construction business that the most expensive tool on a job site is a red pen. A sledgehammer breaks walls, but a red pen in the hand of a city inspector stops the entire world. After I discovered the illegal sewage bypass Brent had installed, I did not rush to the press. I did not go screaming to the neighbors. I went to my study and took out my old typewriter. I did not want digital footprints. I typed a single-page letter addressed to the Environmental Protection Agency and the City Department of Public Works. It was dry, technical, and devastatingly precise. I cited the specific municipal codes regarding hazardous waste disposal and cross-connection violations. I included the GPS coordinates of the concealed valve I had found. I signed it simply, "A concerned citizen." I dropped it in the mailbox at dawn, and then I sat back to watch the demolition. It took 48 hours for the bomb to detonate. I drove my truck to a hill overlooking the Centurion construction site. I parked and poured coffee from my thermos. It was a beautiful morning for a raid. At 9 o'clock sharp, a convoy of white government SUVs rolled onto the site. Men and women in windbreakers with EPA printed on the back stepped out. They did not look like they were there for a friendly chat. They were there for blood. I watched through my binoculars as they swarmed the site. I saw them locating the illegal pipe connection based on my tip. I saw them taking water samples. And then I saw the moment that ends a developer's career. The lead inspector pulled out a bright red sticker the size of a dinner plate. A stop work order. He slapped it right onto the main gate. The silence that followed was deafening. Cranes stopped moving. Jackhammers fell silent. Trucks turned off their engines. In the construction world, silence costs about $10,000 a minute. I saw Brent running out of the site trailer. He was waving his arms, screaming at the federal agents. I could not hear him, but I knew exactly what he was saying. He was trying to bluff. He was trying to lie. But you cannot lie to a water sample. I watched as the lead agent handed Brent a citation that looked thick enough to be a novel. Brent slumped against the chain-link fence. He looked like a man who had just watched his own funeral. The project was dead. The fines for an illegal sewage tap of that magnitude would be in the millions. The investors would pull out before lunch. Apex Realty would likely face criminal charges. Brent was not just fired, he was radioactive. No one in this state would ever hire him to build a doghouse, let alone a condo. I finished my coffee and started the truck. The structural failure was complete. Now I just had to wait for the aftershocks. The aftershocks arrived at my front door at 11 that night. It was raining hard. A cold, biting rain that washed the mud from the street but could not wash away the sins of my family. I was in the kitchen when I heard the pounding. It was not the arrogant, demanding knock of a man who thinks he owns the place. It was the frantic, terrified hammering of someone running for their life. I turned on the security monitor. It was Tasha. She looked broken. Her hair was plastered to her face. She was wearing a coat over her pajamas and she was shivering violently. But it was her eyes that stopped me cold. I had seen that look before. I saw it when she was 6 years old and a neighborhood dog chased her. It was the look of pure terror. "Dad," she screamed, her voice cracking over the intercom. "Dad, please open the door. He is crazy. He is smashing everything." I stood there, my hand hovering over the unlock button. A father's instinct is to protect. It is biological. It is primal. I wanted to open that door and pull her inside and wrap her in a blanket. But then I remembered the coffee shop. I remembered the doctor. I remembered the look on her face when she agreed to put me in a home to get my money. "Please, Dad," she sobbed, leaning her forehead against the wet wood of the door. He threw a lamp at me. "He says it is my fault. He says I didn't get the money fast enough. He is drinking, Dad. He has a gun. I don't have anywhere else to go." I pressed the talk button. My voice was steady but heavy with sorrow. "Call the police, Tasha. Dad, please," she begged, looking up at the camera. "I can't call the police. He is my husband. Just let me in. I will leave him, I swear. I just need a place to sleep tonight." I looked at the image of my daughter. She was reaping the harvest she had planted. She had married a monster because she liked the lifestyle he promised. She had helped him try to destroy me because she wanted the inheritance early. Now the monster was turning on her and she wanted the sanctuary she had tried to steal. "I cannot let you in, Tasha," I said. What, she gasped. "Dad, he might kill me." "He won't kill you," I said. "He is a coward, but if you come in here, you bring his war with you. I am not fighting your battles anymore. You chose him. You stood by him when he humiliated me. You stood by him when he poisoned me. You made your choice." "Dad, I am your daughter," she wailed. "And I am the useless old man you wanted to evict," I replied. "The locks work, Tasha. You tested them yourself." I released the button. I watched on the screen as she slid down the door, sitting on the porch in the rain. She cried for 10 minutes. Then she pulled out her phone. I saw her dial 3 digits. Good. She was finally doing what she should have done years ago. She was facing reality. I watched until the police cruiser arrived. I saw Officer Miller gently help her into the back seat. I saw them drive away. She was safe. She was warm. But she was not in my house. I turned off the monitor. The kitchen was quiet. The rain drummed against the window like 1,000 fingers tapping in judgment. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. Turning my back on my own child. But a foundation cannot hold up a structure that is actively trying to tear it down. Tasha had to hit rock bottom before she could rebuild. And tonight, she hit the concrete. But Brent was still out there. And now, he had nothing left to lose. He had lost his job, his reputation, his money, and his wife. A man with nothing to lose is a dangerous variable. The equation was not balanced yet. I went to the hallway closet and took out my old baseball bat. It was weighted ash solid and heavy. I placed it next to my bed. The EPA had shut down his site, but I had a feeling the final demolition was going to happen right here on my front lawn. People think real estate is about location, location, location. They are wrong. It is about access, access, access. If you own a castle, but your enemy owns the drawbridge, you do not have a castle, you have a prison. For 40 years, people looked at my property and saw a nice 4-bedroom house on a large lot. They saw the oak trees and the manicured lawn. Even Brent, when he lived here, only saw the house. He saw the granite countertops he wanted to install and the walls he wanted to knock down. He walked my backyard every single day for 3 years, smoking his expensive cigars and looking at his phone. He walked right over the most valuable thing I own, and he never once looked down. He never asked why my property line extended in a weird, narrow finger all the way to the ridge behind the woods. He never asked why I paid property taxes on a 10-foot wide strip of scrub brush and rocks that ran for half a mile behind the subdivision. He called it the jungle. He told Tasha we should pave it over, but I called it the green strip. In 1982, when the city was just starting to expand, I looked at the master plan. I saw where the electrical grid was heading. I saw that the geography of this valley meant that if anyone ever wanted to bring high-voltage power lines to the south side, they would have to cross that specific ridge. The land around it was protected wetlands. You cannot build on wetlands. There was only one solid corridor of dry bedrock capable of supporting transmission towers. So I bought it. I bought that useless strip of land for $500 from a farmer who thought I was an idiot. B thought I was crazy too. She asked why we were buying dirt that we couldn't build on. I told her simply that we were not buying dirt, we were buying a toll booth. I had almost forgotten about it until the sewage line incident. But as I sat in my study, looking at the blueprints of the Centurion that Brent had foolishly left on the kitchen counter months ago, I noticed something. The Centurion was a beast. 2 residential towers, a shopping mall, a heated underground garage. A complex like that consumes electricity like a small city. You cannot run a building like that on standard residential lines. You need high-voltage feeders. You need fiber optic bundles for the internet. I traced the proposed utility lines on Brent's map. They stopped at the edge of the construction site. I pulled out my old survey map from 1982. I laid it over Brent's map. I smiled. It was a cold, hard smile. The only way to get power to Brent's career-defining project was to run the cables right down the spine of my green strip. The next morning, I was not surprised when a black sedan pulled into my driveway. It was not the police. It was not Tasha. It was a man in a hard hat and a high-visibility vest holding a clipboard. The logo on his truck said Metro Power and Light. I walked out to the porch. I had my coffee in hand. "Mr. Johnson," the man asked. He looked tired. "That is me. I am Frank Henderson from Metro Power. We spoke on the phone a few months ago about vegetation management." I nodded. I remembered. They wanted to trim some trees. "I am actually here about a different matter today," Mr. Henderson said, shifting his weight. He looked nervous. "We are upgrading the grid for the new development down the hill, the Centurion project." I took a sip of coffee. "I heard they are having some plumbing issues," I said dryly. Henderson chuckled nervously. "Yeah, I heard. A real mess. But that is not my department. We need to run the primary feeders this week. The developer is screaming about deadlines. We just realized that the most efficient route crosses the rear easement of your property. That strip of land behind the woods. The most efficient route," I repeated. "Or the only route." Henderson paused. He stopped smiling. "Well, sir, due to the wetlands on the east and the highway on the west, your land is the only viable corridor for the towers." "I see," I said. "So you need an easement." "It is just a formality," Henderson said, quickly pulling a document from his clipboard. "Standard agreement. We pay you a one-time fee of $5,000 for the disturbance and we run the lines. It will not affect your house at all. You will never even see the wires." $5,000, I said, looking at the paper. "It is a generous offer for unused land," Henderson pressed. "The developer is actually subsidizing it to speed things up." I looked at the signature line. It was blank. I looked at the project name, the Centurion. I looked at the developer listed, Apex Realty. I handed the clipboard back to him. "No," I said. Henderson blinked. "Excuse me," I said. "No," I replied, turning back to my door. "I am not signing it," Mr. Johnson Henderson said, stepping forward, his voice rising. "You do not understand. We have crews scheduled for Monday. If we do not lay these lines, the project cannot connect to the grid. They have elevators to test. They have HVAC systems to run. Without this power, that building is just a concrete statue." "I know," I said. "I am a structural engineer. I know exactly what happens to a modern building without electricity. The ventilation fails. The humidity rises. The mold starts in 48 hours. And without a certificate of occupancy, the bank calls in the construction loan." Henderson stared at me. He realized suddenly that he was not talking to a confused pensioner. He was talking to a man who understood the game better than he did. "Sir," he said, his tone changing to one of desperation, "if you deny this easement, Apex Realty will sue for eminent domain. They will take the land." "Let them try," I said. "Eminent domain requires proof of public necessity. This is not a public utility project. This is a private luxury condo development. The Supreme Court ruled on this 10 years ago. You cannot take my land just to help a private company make a profit." Henderson went pale. He knew the case law. He knew I was right. "So what do you want?" he asked. "More money. 10,000. 20. I looked down the hill toward the construction site where the cranes sat idle. "I do not want money, Mr. Henderson. I have plenty of money." "Then what do you want?" "I want the person who needs this power to come here and ask for it," I said. "You mean the project manager?" "No," I said. "I mean the lead agent. Brent Sterling. And I want his boss, David Sterling. I want them both standing on my porch. Until then, that strip of land stays dark. And so does their project." I went inside and closed the door. I went back to my study and looked at the map again. Brent had called me useless. He had called me obsolete. He had tried to steal my house because he thought it was his biggest asset. He was wrong. My biggest asset was the 10-foot strip of dirt he had wanted to pave over. He needed electricity. He needed light. But for the first time in his life, Brent was going to have to learn to live in the dark. I watched Henderson make a phone call from his truck. I could see him waving his arms. He was delivering the bad news. The sewage backup had cost them time. The lack of power was going to cost them the war. I sat down at my desk. I had one more document to review. It was the original purchase agreement for the green strip from 1982. Bea had been so mad when I bought it. "Caleb," she had said, "we cannot afford $500 for rocks." I wish she was here now. I would tell her that those rocks were about to become the most expensive rocks in the history of this city. I waited. I knew they would come. They had no choice. They had millions of dollars sinking into the mud, and I was holding the only lifeline. But this time, I was not going to be the nice guy who paid the credit card bills. I was the toll booth operator, and the price of admission was going to be everything they had. They say a facade is only as good as the bolts holding it to the frame. If you use cheap steel, the whole face of the building will shear off the moment the wind picks up. Tonight, Brent was trying to bolt a $1 million smile onto a bankrupt soul. He had rented the Grand Ballroom at the Plaza Hotel. It was a black-tie gala ostensibly to raise money for urban development, but in reality it was a desperate attempt to stop the bleeding. After the sewage disaster and the EPA shutdown, the investors were circling like sharks. Brent needed fresh meat. He needed to convince them that the project was still alive. He needed to convince them that he had solved the power problem. I pulled my truck up to the valet stand. It was a rusty Ford sitting between a Bentley and a Rolls-Royce. The valet looked at me like I had made a wrong turn. I handed him a $10 bill and tossed him the keys. "Keep it running, son," I said. "I won't be long." I was wearing the same black suit I wore to bury my wife Bea 3 years ago. It was a little tight in the shoulders and the lapels were out of style, but it was clean. It was honest. I walked past the security check-in. The girl with the clipboard asked for my name. "Caleb Johnson," I said without breaking stride. "The guest of honor." She was too confused to stop me. I walked into the ballroom. The air smelled of expensive perfume, roasted beef, and lies. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto the crowd. I saw men in tuxedos shaking hands and women in silk gowns laughing at jokes that weren't funny. They were the movers and shakers of the city, the people who thought they owned the ground they walked on. I stood in the shadows near the bar and ordered a club soda. I watched the stage. Brent was up there. He looked manic. His tan was too orange, his teeth were too white, and he was sweating through his collar. He was holding a microphone, gripping it so hard his knuckles were white. "Ladies and gentlemen," Brent boomed, his voice echoing through the hall. "Thank you for your patience. I know there have been rumors. I know there have been some minor setbacks with the Centurion project. But I am here tonight to tell you that those hurdles have been cleared." He paused for applause. It was scattered and polite. "The biggest question has been the electrical infrastructure," Brent continued, flashing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Critics said we couldn't power the towers. They said we didn't have access. Well, tonight I am proud to announce that after a long negotiation, my father-in-law, Caleb Johnson, has agreed to grant an easement across his property. The power lines will be laid next week. The Centurion will shine." The room erupted. Real applause this time. Investors breathed sighs of relief. Champagne glasses clinked. Brent beamed, soaking it in. He had done it. He had lied to 300 of the richest people in the city, gambling that he could bully me into signing the papers tomorrow. He took a sip of water, looking triumphant. Then he saw me. I stepped out of the shadows. I walked right down the center aisle. The crowd parted for me not because they knew who I was, but because I walked with the momentum of a freight train. Brent froze. The glass of water stopped halfway to his mouth. His eyes went wide. He motioned frantically to a security guard, but it was too late. I was already at the stage. I didn't climb the stairs. I just stood at the bottom looking up at him. Dad Brent hissed away from the mic. "What are you doing here?" "Get out." "You invited me, Brent," I said loud enough for the front row to hear. "You just told everyone I agreed to the deal. I am here to celebrate." Brent looked at the crowd. He looked at me. He was trapped. If he kicked me out, he looked like a monster. If he let me speak, he risked everything. He gambled on his charm. He laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "Well, look who it is, folks. The man himself, Caleb Johnson. Come on up, Dad." He thought he could control me. He thought he could whisper in my ear and threaten me into playing along. I walked up the stairs. I took the microphone from his hand. I didn't give it back. I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw David Sterling, the CEO of Apex Realty, sitting at the center table. He looked hopeful. He thought I had finally caved. "My name is Caleb Johnson," I said. My voice was deep and steady. It didn't need the microphone to fill the room. "I have been a structural engineer in this city for 40 years. I built the foundations of the library you visit and the hospital where your children were born." The room went quiet. Respectful silence. "My son-in-law just told you that I have agreed to grant an easement for high-voltage power lines to cross my land," I continued. "He told you that the Centurion project is saved." I turned to look at Brent. He was trembling. He was shaking his head slightly, pleading with his eyes. "That is a lie," I said. A gasp rippled through the room. A woman in the front row dropped her fork. "I did not sign an easement," I said, turning back to the crowd. "And I never will. You see, that strip of land behind my house is not just dirt. It is a migration corridor for the eastern box turtle, a protected species." Brent stepped forward. "Dad, stop this," he whispered. I ignored him. This afternoon at 4 o'clock, I met with the City Parks Department and the Federal Wildlife Conservation Bureau. I announced, pulling a folded document from my inside pocket. "I have officially donated the green strip to the city. As of this moment, that land is the Beatrice Johnson Wildlife Sanctuary." I held up the deed. It had the gold seal of the city stamped on it. "It is a permanent conservation easement," I said. "Federal law prohibits the construction of any utility infrastructure, roads, or commercial development on that land. Forever. No power lines, no fiber optics, no Centurion." The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a collapsing building. David Sterling stood up slowly. His face was purple. He looked at Brent. "Is this true?" David shouted. Brent stammered. I didn't know. I leaned into the microphone one last time. "My son-in-law bet your money on land he didn't own," I said. "He tried to build a castle in the air, but gravity always wins. Enjoy your dinner." I dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a deafening thud. I walked off the stage. Chaos erupted behind me. I heard David Sterling screaming. I heard investors shouting for their lawyers. I heard the sound of chairs being knocked over. Brent stood alone on the stage. The spotlight was still on him, but he was in total darkness. He looked small. He looked like a child who had broken a valuable vase and knew there was no glue in the world that could fix it. I walked through the crowd. People stared at me with a mix of horror and awe. I didn't look back. I walked out to the valet stand. The kid brought my truck around. "Did you have a good time, sir?" he asked, opening the door. I looked back at the hotel. I could see arguments breaking out on the balcony. "I fixed a structural defect, son," I said, climbing into the cab. It was messy, but necessary. I drove away into the night. The city lights blurred in my rearview mirror. I felt a deep sense of peace. I had named the sanctuary after Bee. She would have liked that. She loved turtles. She used to say they were like me. Hard on the outside, soft on the inside, and impossible to move when they didn't want to go. Brent was finished. The project was dead. The land was safe. But I knew the war wasn't quite over. A man like Brent doesn't just fade away. He explodes, and when he explodes, he tries to take everyone with him. I checked my phone. One new message from Tasha. "Dad, what did you do? Brent is coming over there. He has a gas can." I sighed. I put the truck in gear and headed home. Let him come. I had dealt with fires before, and this time I was ready to put it out for good. The sound of a microphone hitting a hardwood stage is distinct. It is a heavy thud followed by a sharp screech of feedback that cuts right through the nervous system. But the silence that followed my announcement was even louder. It was the sound of a vacuum sealing shut, the sound of $300 million evaporating in a single second. I stood near the exit watching the room implode. It was a controlled demolition, and I had just pushed the plunger. The first reaction came from the front table. Mr. Yamamoto, the lead investor from the Tokyo Consortium, stood up. He did not yell. He simply buttoned his tuxedo jacket, picked up his briefcase, and walked out. His entire team followed him in a single file line. They did not look at Brent. They did not look at David Sterling. They walked out as if the room was empty. That silence was the signal. Suddenly, the room erupted. The polite murmur of the gala turned into the angry roar of a mob. Men who had been shaking Brent's hand 5 minutes ago were now shouting for explanations. Lawyers were pulling out phones, dialing their firms before they even left the room. I saw David Sterling stand up. His face was a mask of purple rage. He was not looking at me. He knew better than to fight a man holding a federal deed. He was looking at the man who had lied to him. He was looking at Brent. David marched up the stairs to the stage. He moved fast for a big man. Brent was still standing there, frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. He reached out a hand toward his boss, a desperate plea for understanding. David did not take the hand. He slapped it away. The sound of the slap echoed through the microphone that was still lying on the floor. "You lied to me!" David roared. His voice did not need amplification. "You told me the easement was signed. You told me the land was secured. You let me stand up here and pledge my reputation on a lie." Brent stammered. "David, please listen. I can fix this. He is just an old man. I can make him sign. We can sue him." David grabbed Brent by the lapels of his expensive rental tuxedo. He pulled him close, his face inches from Brent's. "You cannot sue a federal wildlife sanctuary, you idiot," David screamed. "The project is dead. The financing is gone. And so are you." David shoved Brent backward. Brent stumbled, tripping over a monitor speaker and falling hard onto his back. "You are fired, Brent," David yelled, pointing a shaking finger at him. "Do not come to the office tomorrow. Do not call me. If I see your face again, I will have you arrested for corporate fraud. You are finished in this town. You are finished everywhere." David turned his back on him and walked off the stage, signaling to his security team to clear the room. Brent lay there on the stage floor. The spotlight was still hitting him, blinding him. His hair was messed up. His tie was crooked. The facade of the successful real estate mogul had cracked wide open, and underneath was just a scared, greedy boy. I should have left then. The job was done. The foundation of his lies had collapsed. But I stayed. I wanted to make sure he understood why this happened. I walked a few steps back into the room, just enough for him to see me standing in the doorway. Brent sat up. He looked around the emptying room. He saw the overturned chairs. He saw the backs of the investors leaving. And then he saw me. The look on his face changed instantly. The fear vanished, replaced by a primal animalistic hatred. He didn't see a father-in-law. He didn't see a human being. He saw the architect of his destruction. "You," Brent screamed. It was a guttural sound like an animal caught in a trap. He scrambled to his feet. He didn't care about the investors anymore. He didn't care about his boss. He only wanted blood. My blood. "You ruined everything," he shrieked, jumping off the stage. "I will kill you." He started running toward me. He was 35 years younger than me. He was faster. He was fueled by adrenaline and rage. He knocked over a waiter carrying a tray of champagne glasses. The crash of breaking glass added to the chaos. People screamed and scattered. I did not move. I stood my ground. My feet were planted shoulder-width apart, just like I stood when I was bracing a wall against the wind. I was not afraid of him. A building does not fear the storm. It endures it. Brent was 10 feet away. His hands were reaching for my throat. His eyes were wild. I prepared to defend myself. I still had the strength of 40 years of manual labor in my arms. But I didn't have to. Two massive shapes moved from the shadows near the door, the hotel security. They intercepted him 5 feet from me. It was like watching a sedan hit a concrete barrier. One guard tackled him around the waist, lifting him off his feet. The other grabbed his arms. They slammed him into the carpeted floor. The air left Brent's lungs in a loud whoosh. "Get off me!" Brent screamed, kicking and thrashing. "Let me go! I am going to kill him!" "Sir, stop resisting," the guard shouted, pinning Brent's face into the floor. I looked down at him. He was pathetic. His nose was bleeding onto the expensive carpet. His tuxedo was torn. He was spitting curses at the floor. "Officer, arrest," this man David Sterling shouted from across the room. "I want to press charges. Assault, disorderly conduct, and trespassing. He is no longer an employee of Apex Realty." Brent stopped struggling for a second. He lifted his head and looked at me. There were tears in his eyes now, mixing with the blood. "Why?" he whispered. "Why did you do this? We were family." I looked at him calmly. I didn't feel anger anymore. I just felt a cold, heavy pity. "We were never family, Brent," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. "You were just a tenant, and you violated the lease." The police arrived moments later. They handcuffed him. They dragged him out of the ballroom. He was still screaming threats, but they sounded hollow now. The investors watched with disgust. This was the man who wanted to handle their millions, this violent, unstable child. As they shoved him into the back of the squad car outside, flashing lights painting the hotel facade in red and blue, I knew his life was effectively over. An assault charge, a public meltdown, corporate fraud. His name was Mud. He would never sell a stick of gum in this city again, let alone a building. I walked out to my truck. The valet handed me my keys, looking at me with wide eyes. He had seen the whole thing. "Drive safe, sir," he said respectfully. I climbed into the cab of my old Ford. The seat was worn but comfortable. It smelled of old leather and hard work. I started the engine. It roared to life, reliable and strong. I drove away, leaving the Plaza Hotel behind me. I didn't turn on the radio. I just listened to the hum of the tires on the pavement. My phone buzzed. It was Tasha again. "He is calling me from the police station," she texted. "He is screaming. He says he needs bail money. What do I do?" I pulled over to the side of the road. I typed a reply. "You do nothing, Tasha. You let him sit there. You let him feel the weight of the roof he pulled down on his own head." I put the phone away and merged back into traffic. The war was over. The enemy was in chains. My land was safe. But as I drove through the dark streets toward my empty house, I didn't feel like celebrating. Demolition is necessary work, but it is never pretty. It leaves a mess. It leaves dust. I had saved my dignity. I had saved my legacy, but I had lost my family. I thought about Bea. She would have cried for them. She had a soft heart. But she also knew that you cannot build a straight house with crooked timber. I had tried to straighten them out for years. Tonight I had simply removed the rot. Now came the hardest part of any job, cleaning up the debris and trying to build something new from what was left. 3 days after Brent was dragged out of the Plaza Hotel in handcuffs, the doorbell rang. It was raining again, the kind of gray, persistent drizzle that soaks into your bones. I was in the living room boxing up the last of Bea's porcelain figurines. I was not packing them to move. I was packing them to donate. I didn't need the physical reminders anymore. I carried her memory in my heart, and that was enough. I looked at the security monitor. It was Tasha. She looked different than she had the night she came begging for sanctuary from Brent's rage. That night she had been terrified. Today she looked calculated. She was wearing a modest dress, not the designer clothes she usually flaunted. Her hair was pulled back simply. She wore no makeup. It was a costume, the costume of the prodigal daughter returning home humble and repentant. I pressed the unlock button, not because I was going to let her stay, but because this conversation needed to happen face to face. It needed to be final. I opened the heavy oak door. Tasha stood on the porch, shivering slightly, though it wasn't that cold. She looked up at me with big, watery eyes. "Dad," she whispered. "Can I come in?" I stepped back and held the door open. She walked into the foyer and looked around. She looked at the boxes. "Are you moving?" she asked, a tremor in her voice. "I am cleaning house, Tasha," I said, closing the door. "I am getting rid of things I do not need." She turned to me and burst into tears. It was a theatrical performance worthy of an award. She threw herself at me, burying her face in my chest. I stood stiffly, my arms at my sides. I did not hug her back. "Oh, Dad," she sobbed. "I am so sorry. I was so scared. You have to believe me. Brent forced me to do everything. He made me sign those papers. He made me ignore you. He is a monster, Dad." I am just glad he is in jail so I can finally come home to you. I listened to her cry. I listened to the rhythm of her breathing. I waited for her to finish. When she finally pulled away, she wiped her eyes and looked at me expectantly. She was waiting for the reassurance. She was waiting for me to say, "It is okay, sweetie, Daddy is here." She was waiting for the ATM to open back up. I have nowhere to go. Dad, she said, sniffing. The bank took the condo. Brent drained our joint account before he was arrested. I have $20 to my name. I just want my old room back. I want to take care of you. I want to be a family again. I walked past her into the living room. I sat down in my leather armchair. "Sit down, Tasha," I said, pointing to the sofa. She sat on the edge of the cushion, clutching her purse like a shield. "You say Brent forced you?" I asked calmly. "Yes," she said, nodding vigorously. "He was controlling Dad. He threatened me. I didn't want to hurt you. I love you. You know I love you, right?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. "I do not think you were forced, Tasha," I said. "I think you were an active participant. In fact, I think you were the architect of some of the cruelest parts." "What do you mean?" she asked, blinking. I tapped the screen. I found the audio file from the coffee shop, the one I had recorded the day she tried to drug me. I pressed play. The sound was clear. It cut through the silence of the room like a knife. Tasha's voice, tinny but unmistakable, filled the air. "Nan len an. Ki gye dua bo vau tri happy hills d. Em chang phải ngui mui do yo của ông a rồi. Bang nha song min se mua biet tu a Malibu." "Hurry up, honey. Sign the papers to put Dad in Happy Hills. I am sick of smelling his ointment. Once we sell the house, we will buy the villa in Malibu." I stopped the recording. Tasha went pale. All the color drained from her face, leaving her looking like a wax statue. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The humble daughter act evaporated, instantly exposed by her own venomous words. "You were not forced. Tasha," I said, my voice low and hard. "You were bored. You were greedy. And you were cruel. You looked at the man who carried you on his shoulders, who paid for your college, who walked you down the aisle, and you didn't see a father. You saw a smell. You saw an obstacle standing between you and a beach house." "Dad," she stammered, I was just saying that to appease him. I didn't mean it." I held up my hand to stop her. "Do not lie to me, Tasha. Not anymore. I can forgive weakness. If you had come to me and said, 'Dad, we are broke. We need help,' I would have given you everything. I can forgive fear. If you had said, 'Dad, I am afraid of Brent,' I would have protected you." I leaned forward, staring directly into her eyes. "But I cannot forgive cruelty. You sat across from me and watched me drink water you thought was poisoned. You were willing to erase my mind to fill your bank account. That is not something a daughter does. That is not even something a human being does to a stranger." Tasha started to cry again, but this time it was different. It wasn't the performance of a victim. It was the terrified sobbing of someone who realizes they have been caught. "I am sorry," she wailed. "I am so sorry. Please, Dad, don't throw me out. I have nothing." I stood up and walked to my desk. I opened the drawer and took out my checkbook. I uncapped my pen. I wrote out a check. I tore it out of the book with a sharp ripping sound. I walked back to Tasha and held it out. $5,000. "Here," I said. She looked at the check. She looked at me. She didn't take it immediately. "What is this?" she whispered. "This is a severance package, Tasha," I said. "This is enough for first and last month's rent on a small apartment and some groceries. It is enough to buy you a suit for job interviews." She reached out and took the check, her fingers trembling. "You want a Malibu villa?" I said. "Good. Go earn it. Get a job. Wait tables, scrub floors. Do what I did. Build your own life brick by brick. Maybe then you will understand the value of a dollar and the value of a home." "Dad, please," she begged, clutching the check. "I can't do it alone. You are 30 years old, Tasha," I said. "You are not a child. And I am not your safety net anymore. I am just the old man with the bad smell." I walked to the front door and opened it. The rain was still falling. "It is time to go, Tasha." She stood up slowly. She looked around the living room one last time. She looked at the photos on the mantel, photos of a happy family that didn't exist anymore. She walked to the door. She stopped on the threshold and looked back at me. Her eyes were red. "Will I ever see you again?" she asked. I looked at her. I saw the ghost of the little girl I loved. But I also saw the woman who tried to destroy me. I don't know, Tasha, I said honestly. That depends on who you become. But the person standing in front of me right now, no. I don't want to see her again. She lowered her head and walked out into the rain. I watched her walk down the driveway. She looked small and alone. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel anger. I felt a deep, hollow sadness. It is a terrible thing to sever a limb to save the body. It hurts, but it is necessary for survival. I closed the door. I locked the deadbolt. I engaged the biometric scanner. Beep. System secured. I turned back to the empty house. It was quiet. But for the first time in a long time, the air felt clean. The rot was gone. Now I could finally rest. They say that demolition is the loud part of the job. It is the part everyone watches because it is full of dust and noise and drama. But the real work happens after the dust settles. It is the cleanup. It is the hauling away of the debris so you can see the ground again. For the next 2 weeks, my life was a series of meetings with lawyers and prosecutors. I sat in Isaac Goldblum's office, surrounded by stacks of paper that smelled like old dust and justice. Isaac looked at me over his spectacles. "We have the divorce papers ready for Tasha," he said. "Brent is contesting it. He wants spousal support. He claims he is accustomed to a certain lifestyle." I laughed. It was a dry sound. "He is about to become accustomed to a 6x8 cell, Isaac," I said. "He won't need spousal support where he is going." I picked up the pen. I was paying for Tasha's divorce. Not because I had forgiven her. I hadn't. She was still working double shifts at a diner downtown, living in a studio apartment the size of my walk-in closet. I hadn't called her. I hadn't visited her. But I wasn't going to let a predator like Brent drag her down with his debt. I was severing the limb to save the patient. "Make sure she gets her maiden name back, Isaac," I said, signing the check for the retainer. "And make sure she is absolved of all his business debts. I want her to walk away with nothing but the clothes on her back and a clean slate." Isaac nodded. "You are a hard man, Caleb. Most fathers would just give her the money to come home." I looked out the window at the city skyline. If I give her the money, Isaac, she learns nothing. If I give her freedom, she might learn how to survive. With Tasha's legal safety net secured, we turned our attention to the main event, the destruction of Brent Sterling. The district attorney was very interested in my file. He was especially interested in the toxicology report from the night at the coffee shop. But the nail in the coffin wasn't the poison. It was the doctor. Dr. Aris, the man Brent had hired to declare me incompetent, didn't have the stomach for prison. When the police showed up at his practice with a warrant, he folded faster than a cheap lawn chair. He gave them everything. Emails, text messages, recorded calls where Brent explicitly asked him to falsify the medical records in exchange for $10,000. That testimony turned a family dispute into a federal case. Then came the EPA. They weren't interested in family drama. They were interested in the blue PVC pipe running from the Centurion into the city storm drain. They traced the work orders. They found the contractor who installed it, a man who admitted under oath that Brent Sterling had personally ordered the illegal bypass to save time and money. The charges piled up like bricks on a pallet. Conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, reckless endangerment, violation of the Clean Water Act. Brent's lawyer tried to cut a deal. He offered a plea. He said Brent was under stress. He said it was a misunderstanding. I was sitting in the back of the courtroom when the plea was rejected. I saw the look on Brent's face. He looked at his lawyer, then he looked back at me. For the first time, I didn't see hatred in his eyes. I saw realization. He finally understood that he hadn't just fought an old man. He had fought a force of nature. The trial was short. The evidence was overwhelming. On a Tuesday morning, exactly 1 month after he turned off my TV, Brent stood before the judge. He wasn't wearing his expensive suit. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit provided by the county. He looked smaller. Without his ego to inflate him, he was just a man who had made a series of terrible choices. The judge was not lenient. "Mr. Sterling," she said, peering down from the bench, "you attempted to dismantle a man's life. You tried to steal his dignity, his home, and his mind. And when that failed, you endangered an entire community to save your profit margin." Brent looked down at his shackled hands. "I sentence you to 5 years in state prison," the judge announced, "followed by 3 years of probation. You are also ordered to pay restitution to the city for the environmental cleanup." The gavel banged. I didn't smile. I didn't cheer. In construction, when a building collapses because of shoddy workmanship, you don't celebrate the investigation. You just mourn the waste of materials. Brent was wasted material. He had charm. He had energy. He could have been a good builder, but he lacked the foundation. He lacked integrity. As the bailiff led him away, Brent stopped. He looked at me one last time. "I am sorry, Caleb," he mouthed. I looked at him. I didn't mouth anything back. Sorry is a word you say when you spill coffee. Sorry is not a word that fixes a cracked foundation. I stood up and walked out of the courthouse. The sun was shining. The air was crisp. Isaac was waiting for me on the steps. "It is done, Caleb," he said. "Tasha is divorced. Brent is in prison. The liens on your house have been cleared." I took a deep breath. "What about the legal fees?" I asked. "Paid in full," Isaac said. "From the restitution order. Brent's assets are being liquidated. His car, his watches, his investments. It is all going to pay for the mess he made." "Justice," I said. "It is a slow process, Isaac, but it holds up if you build it right." I shook his hand and walked to my truck. I drove home. The neighborhood was quiet. The street had been repaved by the city crews. The sinkhole was gone. The grass in my front yard was starting to grow back. I walked into my house. It was empty. The boxes of B's things were gone, donated to the charity shop. The furniture was rearranged. I had moved my recliner back to the spot I liked. I sat down. I picked up the remote control. The same remote Brent had snatched from my hand a month ago. I turned on the TV. This Old House was on. I watched Tom Silva fixing a porch. He was talking about using galvanized nails to prevent rust. I smiled. I was alone. I had no wife. I had no daughter in the house. I had no son-in-law. But I had peace. I had rebuilt my life. I had reinforced the walls. I had weathered the storm. But as I sat there in the quiet house, I realized something. A fortress is safe, but it is also lonely. I had won the war, but I was the only one left on the battlefield. I needed to do something different. I needed to stop guarding the castle and start living in the world again. I looked at the coffee table. There was a brochure lying there. It was for a Winnebago RV, the kind B and I used to talk about buying when we retired. We talked about driving the Pacific Coast Highway. We talked about seeing the Grand Canyon. We never did it. We were always too busy taking care of Tasha, too busy saving money for her college, too busy fixing her mistakes. Well, Tasha was on her own now. Brent was in a cage. I picked up the brochure. "I am 70 years old," I whispered to the empty room. I stood up. I walked to the kitchen and grabbed a beer. "I am not dead yet." I walked to the phone and dialed the dealership number on the back of the brochure. "Hello," a salesman answered. "This is Caleb Johnson," I said. "You have a 40-foot adventure on your lot, the one with the heavy-duty suspension." "Yes, sir, we do," the salesman said. "Is it ready to drive off the lot today?" I asked. "It sure is." "Good," I said. "I am coming down, and I am paying cash." I hung up the phone. I looked around the kitchen. I looked at the table where I had eaten thousands of meals. I looked at the window where I had watched my family fall apart. It was time to leave. Not because I was evicted, but because I was choosing to go. The house was just wood and brick. I could sell it. I could keep it. It didn't matter. My home wasn't here anymore. My home was wherever I decided to park my boots. I finished my beer and threw the bottle in the recycling bin. The demolition was over. The cleanup was done. Now it was time to build something just for me. Selling a house you built with your own hands is not like selling a car or a piece of furniture. It is like transplanting a heart. You have to make sure the new body will not reject it. You have to make sure the new owners understand that the creak in the hallway floorboard is not a defect, but a greeting. I put the house on the market 3 days after Brent was sentenced. The sign in the yard did not say Apex Realty. It was a private sale. I screened the buyers myself. I had a line of developers knocking on my door offering cash. They wanted to tear it down and build 2 modern boxes on the lot. I turned them all away. I told them the foundation was too strong for their weak ambitions. Then came Michael and Sarah. They were young, barely 30. Michael was a carpenter, and Sarah was a landscape architect. When they walked in, they did not talk about knocking down walls. They talked about the crown molding. They ran their hands over the oak banister I had sanded 40 years ago. Michael looked at the exposed beams in the living room and asked if they were original pine. I told him they were, and he smiled like a kid on Christmas. I knew then that the house would be safe. We sat at the kitchen table to sign the papers. I had one condition. a condition that was non-negotiable. The land behind the wood line, I said, tapping the map. The green strip. It is not part of the sale. Sarah nodded. We know Mr. Johnson. We checked the city records. It is the Beatrice Johnson Wildlife Sanctuary. We think it is beautiful. We promise to keep the trail clear, but we will never build on it. I looked at them. They were holding hands under the table. They reminded me of Bea and me when we were that age, full of hope and not yet scarred by the world. I signed the papers. I handed over the keys. The biometric locks were reset. The house was theirs. I walked out the front door with a single duffel bag. I did not look back. A builder knows when a project is finished. You pack your tools and you move to the next job site. My next job site was parked in the driveway. It was a 40-foot Winnebago Adventurer, a beast of a machine. It was painted a deep metallic blue that shimmered in the sun. It had a diesel engine that purred with the low rumble of unlimited potential. Inside it had a king-size bed, a full kitchen, and a shower with better water pressure than the Bluebird Motel. I climbed into the driver's seat. It felt like the cockpit of a plane, high up above the traffic, commanding. But as I sat there gripping the leather steering wheel, I felt a pang of silence. The passenger seat was empty. It was a wide, comfortable seat designed for a co-pilot. Bea was supposed to be sitting there holding the map and telling me I was driving too fast. I looked at the empty seat. I could not fill it with a person. No one could replace Bea. But I could not travel alone. A man needs a crew even if the crew is small. I started the engine and drove to the county animal shelter. It was a noisy place, smelling of bleach and desperation. Dogs barked and jumped against the chain-link fences, begging to be chosen. I walked past the puppies. I walked past the purebreds. I stopped at the last cage in the row. Lying on a concrete floor was a German Shepherd mix. He was old, his muzzle was gray, he had a scar running down his flank, and one of his ears was chipped. He did not bark. He lifted his head and looked at me with eyes that had seen too much trouble. He was a stray, the volunteer said, standing behind me. We found him wandering near the highway. He is about 8 years old. Nobody wants the old ones. They want the cute puppies. He is scheduled to be put down tomorrow. I looked at the dog. He looked back at me. We were the same. Two old fighters who had been discarded by the world because we were considered obsolete. Open the cage, I said. The volunteer hesitated. He can be a little grumpy, sir. He is set in his ways. So am I said. Open it. She unlocked the gate. The dog stood up slowly. He sniffed my hand. I smelled of diesel and sawdust. He seemed to like that. He leaned his heavy head against my leg and let out a long sigh. I knelt down and scratched him behind the chipped ear. You ready to get out of here, partner? I asked. He wagged his tail once, a subtle acknowledgement. What are you going to call him? The volunteer asked as I signed the adoption papers. I looked at the dog. He stood proud despite his scars. He had survived the streets. He had survived the cage, and now he was getting a second chance. I am going to call him Justice, I said. Why Justice? She asked. Because it was a long time coming, I replied. Justice hopped into the passenger seat of the RV as if he had been riding shotgun his whole life. He curled up on the leather seat and put his head on his paws, watching the road through the massive windshield. I climbed into the driver's seat. I adjusted the mirrors. I checked the gauges. Fuel tank full, water tank full, battery charged. I put the transmission in drive. The air brakes hissed. The massive vehicle lurched forward. We rolled out of the shelter parking lot and onto the main road. I drove past the entrance to my old subdivision. I saw the roof of my old house peeking over the trees. I saw the new owners, Michael and Sarah, planting flowers in the front yard. I felt a weight lift off my chest. A weight I had been carrying for years. The weight of expectation. The weight of being the provider, the protector, the bank. I turned onto the on-ramp for Interstate 40. Westbound. Where are we going, Justice? I asked. The dog looked at me and gave a short bark. You are right, I said. West. Toward the ocean. I accelerated. The engine roared. The white lines of the highway began to blur beneath us. I reached into the console and pulled out a framed photo of Bea. I propped it up on the dashboard right between the steering wheel and the windshield. We are finally doing it, Bea, I whispered. It took a little longer than we planned, and the crew is a little different, but we are on our way. I drove until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. I didn't stop at a hotel. I didn't stop at a house. I pulled into a rest area overlooking a valley. I parked the RV. I extended the slide-outs. I cooked a steak on the portable grill. Justice ate the trimmings. We sat in camping chairs outside the RV watching the stars come out. For the first time in 40 years, I didn't have to worry about a leaking roof or a cracking foundation. I didn't have to worry about a greedy son-in-law or an ungrateful daughter. My home was on wheels. My backyard was the entire continent of North America. I took a sip of beer and looked at Justice. "You know, boy," I said, "people think that when you get old, your life shrinks. They try to put you in a box. They try to take your keys." Justice looked up at me, his ears perked. "But they are wrong," I continued. "When you get old, you realize that the box was just an illusion. You can break the walls. You can drive away." My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a notification from the bank. The wire transfer from the sale of the house had cleared. The number was large, enough to drive this RV around the world 3 times. I turned the phone off. I threw it in the drawer. I looked at the road stretching out in front of us, silver in the moonlight. Tomorrow, we would see the Grand Canyon. The day after that, maybe the Rockies. I was Caleb Johnson, structural engineer, father, survivor, and now traveler. "Come on, Justice," I said, standing up. "Let us get some sleep. We have a lot of ground to cover tomorrow." We went inside. I locked the door. But this time I didn't lock it to keep enemies out. I locked it to keep the peace in. The engine ticked as it cooled down. The wind whispered through the trees. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in months, I didn't dream of demolition. I dreamed of the open road. Before I turned the key and pointed my new home toward the horizon, I had one last inspection to perform. In my line of work, you never walk away from a demolition site until you are sure the dust has settled and the debris is contained. You have to check the perimeter one last time. I parked the Winnebago in the visitor lot of the county detention center. It looked out of place among the rusted sedans and the gray concrete walls of the prison. The RV was a beacon of freedom shimmering in the midday sun, while the building in front of me was a monument to confinement. I left Justice in this cab with the air conditioning running and the radio playing soft jazz. "I will be right back, partner," I said, just taking out the trash. I walked through the double doors. The air inside smelled of industrial cleaner and stale sweat. It was the smell of bad choices. I went through the metal detector. I emptied my pockets. I showed my ID. The guards looked at me with bored eyes. To them, I was just another visitor coming to see another inmate. They didn't know that I was the one who put him in there. I sat in the visitation booth. It was a small cubicle divided by a thick pane of scratched plexiglass. On my side, there was a plastic chair bolted to the floor. On the other side was an empty steel stool. I waited. 10 minutes passed, then 20. I didn't check my watch. I had nowhere else to be. I had the rest of my life. Finally, the heavy steel door on the other side buzzed and clanked open. A guard stepped in, followed by a man in a bright orange jumpsuit. It took me a second to recognize him. Brent Sterling had always been a man who defined himself by his exterior. The Italian suits, the silk ties, the expensive haircuts, the manicured fingernails. Without those things, he looked like a ghost. His head was shaved, his face was gaunt pale and covered in a patchy stubble. He walked with a shuffle, his shoulders hunched. The arrogance that used to radiate from him like heat was gone, replaced by a shivering anxiety. He sat down. He didn't look at me at first. He looked at the handcuffs chained to the table. Then he slowly lifted his eyes. When he saw me, something flickered behind his gaze. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even fear. It was confusion. Deep, profound confusion. He genuinely didn't understand how he had ended up here. He picked up the black phone handset. His hand was shaking. I picked up mine. The plastic felt cold against my ear. "Hello, Brent," I said. He stared at me. His breathing was shallow and rapid. "You came," he whispered. His voice was scratchy, like he hadn't used it in days. "I knew you would come. I told my lawyer you would come. You are going to drop the charges, right? You are going to tell the DA it was all a mistake." I looked at him. Even now, sitting in a cage, he was trying to negotiate. He was trying to close a deal. "I am not here to drop charges, Brent," I said calmly. "I am leaving town today. I am driving west. I just came to say goodbye." "Goodbye," he repeated. The words seemed to choke him. "You are leaving. What about me?" Caleb, look at where I am. I am in prison. I am surrounded by animals. You have to get me out. You have the money. You have the connections. I leaned forward. The plexiglass was cool against my forehead. You put yourself in there, Brent. You poured the foundation of this cell every time you lied, every time you cheated, every time you treated people like rungs on a ladder. Brent's face twisted. The confusion turned into desperation. He started to pull at his handcuffs. The chain rattled against the steel table. "Stop it," he hissed. "Stop acting so holy." I did what I had to do. I was trying to build something for us. For the family. For yourself, I corrected him. Always for yourself. He slammed his fist against the glass. The guard in the corner took a step forward, his hand resting on his baton. Brent flinched and lowered his hand. "Why are you doing this to me?" Brent screamed into the phone. Tears started to stream down his face, cutting tracks through the grime on his cheeks. "Why do you hate me so much? I was your son-in-law. We ate dinner at your table for 3 years. He leaned in close, his eyes wide and pleading. "You are my father, Caleb. You are the only father figure I have. How can you leave your son in a place like this?" I listened to him. I listened to the word father come out of his mouth. It was the same mouth that had called me useless, the same mouth that had called me a parasite, the same mouth that had ordered his wife to put me in a nursing home because I smelled like ointment. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad. I felt a sense of closure. The structure was condemned. It was time to walk away. I reached up and adjusted my cap. It was a new cap. It had the logo of the National Park Service on it. "I am not your father, Brent," I said. My voice was steady, flat, and final. "I was your landlord. I was your banker. And for a while I was your victim. But I was never your father." Brent sobbed openly now, snot running down his nose. "But you can't just leave me," he wailed. I stood up. I looked down at him through the glass. "You know, Brent," I said, "I have been thinking about something you said to me. The night this all started." He looked up, wiping his eyes with his shoulder. "What?" "The night you took the remote control from my hand," I said. "You turned off the television. You looked at me, and you said watching TV was a waste of time. You said I needed to do something productive." Brent stared at me blankly. He didn't remember. To him it was just another Tuesday. To me it was the moment the world changed. I smiled. A genuine smile. "You were right, Brent. You were absolutely right." I paused, letting the words sink in. "That TV show really was a waste of time. Since you turned it off, I have accomplished so much. I saved a wildlife sanctuary. I exposed a corrupt company. I fixed the city's infrastructure. I reclaimed my dignity. I bought an RV. And I cleaned out all the trash from my life." I looked around the sterile visiting room. "I have been very productive, Brent. And I have you to thank for the motivation." Brent's jaw dropped. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He realized that his own arrogance was the spark that had burned his life to the ground. "You old bastard," he whispered. "You planned this." "I didn't plan it," I said. "I just finished it." I hung the phone back on the cradle. Brent started screaming. I couldn't hear the words anymore, but I could see his mouth moving. I could see him slamming his hands against the glass. I could see the guard moving in, grabbing him by the shoulders, hauling him up from the stool. I turned my back on him. I walked toward the exit. I heard the heavy steel door buzz open. I stepped out of the visiting room and back into the lobby. I took a deep breath. The air still smelled of cleaner, but underneath it I could smell the fresh air coming from outside. I walked out the front doors into the blinding sunshine. The heat hit my face and it felt good. It felt like life. I walked across the parking lot to the Winnebago. Justice saw me coming. He barked and wagged his tail, his paws tapping on the dashboard. I climbed into the driver's seat. I closed the door. The sound of the prison was gone, replaced by the hum of the refrigerator and the soft jazz on the radio. "You ready, boy?" I asked. Justice licked my hand. I released the parking brake. I put the massive vehicle in gear. I pulled out of the parking lot. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. There was nothing behind me worth looking at. I turned right onto the highway. The sign said Interstate 40 West, Pacific Ocean, 2,000 miles. I tapped the steering wheel in time with the music. I am Caleb Johnson. I am 70 years old. And I am just getting started. The Pacific Coast Highway is not just a road. It is a ribbon of asphalt that separates the solid earth from the infinite ocean. On one side you have the mountains immovable and ancient. On the other side you have the water constant and changing. I was driving right down the middle, steering my 40-foot Winnebago with one hand and resting the other on the head of my dog Justice. The diesel engine hummed beneath us, a steady rhythm that felt like a heartbeat. We were 2,000 miles away from the house I had built, 2,000 miles away from the courtroom, 2,000 miles away from the life I used to think was the only one that mattered. For 40 years, I measured my life in square feet and property lines. I defined my success by the stability of the structures I raised. I thought that if I built a strong enough roof, nothing could hurt the people living under it. I was wrong. Sometimes the roof just blocks the sun. Sometimes the walls you build to protect your family end up becoming the walls of a prison that keeps them from growing up. I rolled down the window. The smell of salt air filled the cab. It was different than the smell of sawdust and wet concrete. It smelled like freedom. Justice sat up and put his nose to the wind, his ears flapping. He looked at me and barked happily. "I know, boy," I said, laughing. "It is a good day for a drive." My phone lay on the dashboard. For the last week it had been silent. No lawyers, no reporters, no frantic calls from the bank, just the GPS telling me where to turn. But then it buzzed. A single vibration against the hard plastic of the dashboard. I glanced at the screen. It was a message from Tasha. My heart skipped a beat. Old habits die hard. The instinct to worry, to fix, to save kicked in for a split second. But I suppressed it. I was not the foundation anymore. I was just a traveler. I pulled into a scenic overlook. The ocean crashed against the cliffs below, sending up sprays of white foam. I put the transmission in park. I picked up the phone. I opened the message. "Dad," the text read, "I know you probably will not answer, and that is okay. I just wanted to tell you that I got a job today. I am waiting tables at a diner on 4th Street. The pay is terrible and my feet hurt, but I paid for my own groceries tonight. I bought a loaf of bread and some eggs with money I earned myself." I read on. "I was angry at you when you closed the door that night. I hated you. But now I understand. If you had let me in, I would never have left that house. I would have stayed a child forever waiting for you or Brent to take care of me. Thank you for locking the door, Dad. Thank you for forcing me to grow up. I hope you are happy wherever you are." I looked at the words on the screen. They were simple words. But to me they were more beautiful than any skyscraper I had ever built. Tasha was building her own life. It was a small life right now, a life of eggs and bread and sore feet. But it was hers. It was built on a foundation of reality, not on the quicksand of entitlement. My thumb hovered over the reply button. I wanted to type, "I am proud of you." I wanted to type, "I love you." But I didn't. If I replied, I would open the door again. I would become her crutch again. She needed to stand on her own 2 feet without looking for my approval. She needed to know that she could survive the silence. I smiled. A tear rolled down my cheek and got lost in my gray beard. I put the phone down without replying. I looked out at the ocean. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the water in shades of gold and fire. "I am happy, Tasha," I whispered to the wind. "I am finally happy." I put the RV in gear. The air brakes hissed. Justice looked at me, tilting his head. "We are not stopping here, boy," I said. "We have a lot more world to see." I pulled back onto the highway. The road stretched out before us, endless and inviting. I was 70 years old. I had no house. I had no address. But for the first time in my life, I was completely at home. I was Caleb Johnson. And I had finally built the one thing that would last forever. A life that belonged only to me. Respect is a currency that takes a lifetime to earn, but can be lost in a single second of arrogance. Many people mistake silence for weakness and gray hair for obsolescence. They forget that the foundation of a house is always hidden underground, silent and unseen, yet it holds up everything. When you try to destroy the foundation to renovate the facade, you do not get a better house. You get a pile of rubble. Family is not about who sits at your table when you are full. It is about who builds the table, so you have a place to sit. Never bite the hand that built you, because that same hand knows exactly how to dismantle you, piece by piece. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever had to stand your ground to protect your dignity, or if you have ever had to teach a hard lesson to someone you love, leave a comment below. I read every single one. And do not forget to like and subscribe for more stories about truth, justice, and the resilience of the human spirit. See you on the next road.